On Christmas morning, two desperate little girls grabbed a stranger's boots and begged him with tears streaming down their faces. Please, be our daddy today. The wandering cowboy wanted to run. He'd lost everything once before and swore never to care again. But when he discovered their dying mother inside and the deadly secret that killed their father, he faced an impossible choice. Walk away and let them die. Or fight the most powerful man in Montana and risk his broken heart one final time. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The Montana sky hung gray and heavy on Christmas morning, the kind of cold that bit through leather and settled in a man's bones. Caleb Rowan rode his roan mare along the frost-hardened trail, his breath forming white clouds in the brittle air. He'd been drifting for 3 years now, ever since the day he buried his wife and son in the hard Oklahoma earth. Ever since the day he'd failed to protect them. He didn't celebrate Christmas anymore. Didn't celebrate much of anything. The trail wound through pine forest dusted with yesterday's snow, and Caleb was thinking about the next town. Maybe there'd be work mucking stables or fixing fence line, when he saw them. Two small figures standing by a weathered fence post, perfectly still in the bitter cold. As he drew closer, his chest tightened. Two little girls. One maybe 8 years old, the other no more than 5. They wore thin dresses under threadbare coats, their hands red from the cold, their faces pale as the snow around them. But it was their eyes that stopped him cold, wide, desperate, and fixed on him like he was their last hope on earth. Caleb pulled his mare to a halt 20 feet away. "You girls lost?" The older one, dark-haired and serious-faced, shook her head. Her voice came out small but determined. "No, sir. We've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone." She swallowed hard. "For you, maybe." Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's troubles only led to pain. "I'm nobody, kid. Just passing through." "Please," the younger girl whispered, her blonde hair tangled around her face. "We need help." Something in her voice, that raw, terrified pleading, cut through Caleb's defenses like a hot knife. He recognized that sound. He'd heard it before, in his nightmares, in the echo of his own son's last words. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching in the frozen ground. "Where are your parents?" The older girl's face crumpled slightly before she forced it back into that brave, brittle mask. "Mama's sick. Real sick. She's in the cabin." She pointed toward a structure barely visible through the trees, a sagging, weathered building with smoke trickling from a crooked chimney. "Papa died 4 months ago." "Then you need a doctor, not a drifter." "The doctor won't come," the older girl said, her voice shaking now. "Mr. Holloway, he owns the bank. He told Doc Morrison not to help us no more, said we're thieves, said Mama owes money, and we gotta leave by New Year's or—" She couldn't finish. The younger girl suddenly broke free and ran to Caleb, her small hands grabbing his boot with surprising strength. She looked up at him with eyes so full of desperate hope it physically hurt to meet them. "Please," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Just be our daddy today. Just for today. Mama needs to see we're not alone. She needs to think someone's going to take care of us before she—" The little girl's voice broke into a sob. Caleb stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to mount his horse and ride away. He couldn't do this, couldn't let himself care, couldn't risk that kind of pain again. But the small hands gripping his boot wouldn't let go. The older girl stepped closer, her chin trembling. "I'm Mira," she said softly. "That's June. We know you don't know us. We know you probably got places to be. But Mama's dying, and she keeps crying because she thinks we'll go to the orphan train and get split up forever, and she won't even be here to say goodbye. And I promised I'd find someone who could help us, and you're the first person who even stopped," and her words tumbled out in a desperate rush until she ran out of breath and just stood there, shaking. Caleb looked down at June, still clinging to his boot, then back at Mira's trembling face. Behind them, smoke continued to rise weakly from the cabin's chimney. "Your father," he heard himself say. "How'd he die?" Mira's eyes darkened. "They said it was an accident at the new railway construction site. But Mama said he found something bad, and when he tried to tell people, they killed him." Every fiber of Caleb's being wanted to walk away. This was exactly the kind of trouble he'd spent 3 years avoiding. Getting involved meant caring. Caring meant losing. He'd lost enough. But June's small voice whispered up at him, "Please, mister, please be our daddy. Just for Christmas. Just so Mama can see we're safe before she goes to heaven with Papa." Caleb closed his eyes, took a long breath. When he opened them, he knew he'd already made his choice. The same foolish, devastating choice he always made when someone needed help. "All right," he said quietly. "Take me to your mother." The relief that flooded Mira's face was almost unbearable to witness. June released his boot and grabbed his hand instead, her small fingers ice cold even through his glove. Mira led the way toward the cabin, glancing back every few steps as if afraid he'd vanish. The structure looked worse up close. The roof sagged in the middle, several window panes were cracked, and the whole building tilted slightly to one side like a drunk trying to stay upright. The fence around the small property had collapsed in several places. A skeletal garden sat frozen and dead beside the house. This family had nothing, less than nothing. "Mama don't know we came out," Mira whispered as they reached the door. "She told us to stay inside and keep the fire going, but I heard her crying last night and I knew we needed help." Caleb tied his mare to a post and followed the girls inside. The interior was dark and cold despite the struggling fire. The single room served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom all at once. 2 small cots sat against one wall. A larger bed occupied the far corner, and in it lay a woman who looked like she was fighting a war against death itself. Leona Ward couldn't have been more than 30, but fever and fear had carved years into her face. Her dark hair lay matted against her pillow, her skin flushed with sickness. But her eyes, when they snapped open at the sound of footsteps, burned with fierce protective fury. "Who the hell are you?" she rasped, trying to sit up. "Mira, June, get behind!" A coughing fit cut her off, violent and wet-sounding. "Mama, no!" Mira rushed to her side. "He's here to help. We asked him, and he came." Leona's eyes found Caleb through her pain, and the suspicion there was sharp as broken glass. "I don't know you. Get out of my house." "Mama, please." "I said get out!" Another coughing fit racked her body. When it passed, she was gasping. "I don't need charity. Don't need strangers." Caleb stood in the doorway, understanding her fear perfectly. A strange man in her home, her daughters vulnerable, herself too weak to protect them. Trust was a luxury this woman couldn't afford. "My name's Caleb Rowan," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. Your daughters asked me to check on you, that's all. We don't have money to pay you." "Didn't ask for money." Leona's eyes narrowed. "Everyone wants something." "Mama," June whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't send him away. You're so sick and we're scared and—" "Hush now, baby." Leona reached out with a shaking hand to stroke June's hair, and the tenderness of the gesture, the fierce love despite the weakness, made Caleb's throat tighten. "Mama's fine. I'm fine." She was clearly not fine. Her breathing rattled in her chest. Sweat beaded her forehead despite the cold. Caleb had seen enough death in his years as a lawman to recognize it circling like a vulture. "You need medicine," he said flatly. "Doctor's medicine. Where's the nearest town?" 3 miles south, but I told you we can't—" "I'll pay for it." The words came out before he'd thought them through. Leona stared at him like he'd just offered to fly to the moon. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" Caleb didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he had too many answers, all tangled up with memories of his own wife coughing in the night, of his son's small hand going cold in his. "Because your daughters asked me to be their daddy for a day," he said simply. "And a father makes sure his family has medicine." Silence filled the cabin. June hiccuped softly. Mira's eyes went wide. Leona's face crumpled, just for a second before she forced it back into that hard, protective mask. "I can't let you—" "Already decided." Caleb turned to Mira. "There a doctor in town? Someone your mother trusts?" "Doc Morrison. He's on Birch Street. But Mr. Holloway told him—" "I don't care what Mr. Holloway told him. I'll be back in 2 hours." He looked at Leona. "Keep that fire going. Keep yourself warm. I'll bring medicine and food." "I don't even know you," Leona whispered. but her resistance was crumbling under the weight of her sickness and fear. "You will," Caleb said. Then softer. "Your girls are brave. Braver than most grown men I've met. They deserve better than this." He walked out before she could argue further, before he could change his mind, before the weight of what he was doing could crush him. Outside, he mounted his mare and rode hard for town. The settlement of Elkridge was barely more than a main street, with a dozen buildings clustered around it like chicks around a hen. A general store, a saloon, a sheriff's office, a church, and a bank that looked too grand for such a small town, all brick and brass where everything else was wood and necessity. Caleb found the doctor's office on Birch Street, a small house with a shingle hanging from the porch. Dr. Edwin Morrison, physician. He knocked hard. When no one answered, he knocked harder. The door opened to reveal a thin man in his 50s, spectacles perched on his nose, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. His eyes widened when he saw Caleb. "If you're here about the Ward family, I can't—" "The Ward woman is dying," Caleb said bluntly. "2 little girls are about to lose their mother. I need medicine. I'll pay whatever it costs." Dr. Morrison's face twisted with something between shame and fear. "You don't understand. Garth Holloway owns this town. He owns the bank, half the businesses, most of the land. When he says I don't treat someone, I don't care about Holloway." Caleb pulled a small leather pouch from his coat and dropped it on the doctor's desk. The clink of coins was unmistakable. "That's $50, more than enough for medicine and a house call." The doctor stared at the pouch like it was a snake. "He'll ruin me. Holloway will—" "Holloway's not here right now. I am. And I'm asking you, are you a doctor or are you a coward?" The words hung in the cold air. Dr. Morrison's face flushed, but shame flickered in his eyes. He looked at the money, then back at Caleb. "She has pneumonia," he said quietly, "probably from weeks of living in that freezing cabin with inadequate food and heat. I treated her once, before Holloway." He trailed off. "She needs sulfanilamide, bed rest, warmth, proper food." "Then get your bag and let's go." "I told you, Holloway will—" "I'll deal with Holloway." Caleb's voice went cold and hard. "You deal with saving a woman's life. Which one of us has the harder job?" Dr. Morrison stood frozen for a long moment. Then, with shaking hands, he reached for his medical bag. "I'll need to get the medicine from the dispensary," he said quietly. "And some other supplies." "Do it. I'll meet you back here in 15 minutes with food from the general store." Caleb left before the doctor could change his mind. He strode to the general store, Hawkins & Sons, Estampe 1878, and pushed through the door. A woman in her 40s stood behind the counter, red-haired and sharp-eyed. Her name tag read Anna McRae. "Help you?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Need supplies for the Ward family. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, dried fruit if you have it. Enough to last 2 weeks." Anna's eyes widened. "You know the Wards?" "Just met them. Why?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Because Garth Holloway's been trying to run them off their land since Michael Ward died. Claims they owe the bank money. Claims Michael was a thief." Her eyes flashed with anger. "But Michael Ward was the most honest man I ever knew. He worked at the railway construction site, kept the books, and he found something that scared him enough to come to me in the middle of the night." Caleb's attention sharpened. "What did he find?" Anna glanced toward the window, checking the street. "Proof that Holloway's been rigging the railway materials contracts, buying cheap, substandard materials and charging the railway company for premium goods, pocketing the difference. Michael had ledgers, invoices, everything. He was going to take it to the U.S. Marshal. And then he died. Crushed by a railway beam that accidentally fell," Anna said bitterly. 3 days after he told me about the evidence. Sheriff Porter ruled it an accident. Everyone in town knows better, but no one dares say it out loud. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before. Small-town tyrants who bought the law and crushed anyone who challenged them. "Where's the evidence now?" "I don't know. Michael told me he hid it somewhere safe, somewhere Leona could find it if anything happened to him. But she's been too sick and scared to look, and Holloway's been circling like a buzzard, waiting to seize the property." Why does he want their land so badly? Anna began gathering supplies, her movements quick and efficient. The railway line is coming through. That little plot of the ward sits right on the proposed route. If Holloway owns it, he can negotiate with the railway company. Could be worth thousands. Everything clicked into place. A man discovers corruption. A man dies. A family is left vulnerable. A powerful man moves in for the kill. Caleb had seen this story before. He'd been too late to stop it before. Maybe this time would be different. Pack everything, he said. Add blankets if you have them. Warm clothes for 2 girls, ages 8 and 5 approximately. Anna's eyes softened. You're helping them. Trying to. Then you should know, Garth Holloway doesn't let anyone interfere with his business. He has men, dangerous men. I've dealt with dangerous men before. Anna studied him for a long moment, taking in the worn colt at his hip, the hard lines of his face, the way he stood like a man who'd learned to watch his back. You're not just a drifter, are you? She asked quietly. Not anymore. The words came out before he could stop them. Used to be a U.S. Marshal. Oklahoma Territory. Her eyebrows rose. Used to be? Long story. Can you have these supplies ready in 10 minutes? I can have them ready in 5. She started moving faster, pulling items from shelves. And I won't charge you full price. Those girls deserve better than what this town's given them. Charge me full price. They've had enough charity. He placed bills on the counter. Charity makes people feel small. Fair trade makes them feel human. Anna paused, then nodded with something like respect. You're a good man, Mr. Rowan. Caleb Rowan. Well, Mr. Rowan, you be careful. Holloway has a way of making good people disappear. So did a lot of men in Oklahoma Territory, Caleb said quietly. I'm still here. 20 minutes later, Caleb rode back toward the ward cabin with Dr. Morrison following in a small buggy loaded with supplies. The doctor hadn't spoken much during the ride, his face tight with fear and shame. They found the cabin exactly as Caleb had left it, smoke still trickling weakly from the chimney. Mira opened the door before they'd even dismounted, her face flooding with relief. You came back, she whispered. You really came back. Said I would. Caleb dismounted and began unloading supplies. How's your mother? Worse. She's been coughing real bad and... Mira's voice broke. I think she's real sick, mister. Dr. Morrison climbed down from his buggy, medical bag in hand. His fear seemed to have transformed into professional determination. Take me to her, child. Inside, Leona had deteriorated noticeably. Her breathing came in short, painful gasps. June sat beside the bed, holding her mother's hand and crying silently. Dr. Morrison moved to her side with practiced efficiency, checking her pulse, listening to her lungs, frowning at what he heard. Pneumonia, as I suspected, he muttered. Advanced stage. Should have treated this weeks ago. He glanced at Caleb. Why didn't she come to me earlier? Couldn't afford it, Mira whispered. After Papa died, we didn't have money for nothing but food. And then Mr. Holloway said you couldn't help us anyway. The doctor's face reddened with shame. I'm sorry, child. I should have come anyway. He opened his bag and began preparing medicine. But we'll fix this now. Your mother's strong. With proper treatment, she'll recover. Leona's eyes fluttered open, focusing on the doctor with confusion. Edwin, why are you... Hush now, Leona. Save your strength. He prepared a syringe with sulfanilamide. This will help fight the infection. You'll need injections twice a day for the next week, along with this tonic. He held up a dark bottle. 3 spoonfuls, 4 times daily. I can't pay you, Leona rasped. Already paid, Caleb said from the doorway. Now let the man work. Leona's eyes found him. Confusion and suspicion and desperate hope all mixed together. Why are you doing this? Caleb didn't have an answer that made sense. Because 2 little girls grabbed his boot and called him daddy? Because he'd failed to save his own family and couldn't bear to fail again? Because for 3 years he'd been running from everything and maybe it was time to run toward something instead? Because it's Christmas, he said simply, and no one should die alone on Christmas. Dr. Morrison administered the injection while June hid her face against Mira's shoulder. Leona bore it stoically, her jaw clenched against the pain. The fever should break within 24 hours, the doctor said. But she needs rest, warmth, and nourishment. Lots of broth, water, keeping her temperature stable. He looked at Caleb. Someone will need to stay with her, monitor her through the night. I'll stay, Mira said immediately. You're 8 years old, Caleb said gently. You need sleep too. I can help, June added, her voice small but determined. Caleb looked at the two girls, exhausted, frightened, but unwilling to leave their mother's side. He recognized that fierce loyalty, that desperate love. We'll take shifts, he said. Girls sleep first. I'll watch your mother until midnight. Then Mira can take over while I sleep. We'll rotate. You're staying? Leona whispered, her eyes wide. Someone needs to keep the fire going. Make sure you don't get worse. Make sure. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Make sure you don't die alone like my wife did. Make sure your daughters don't wake up orphans on Christmas morning. Dr. Morrison packed up his supplies, leaving several bottles of medicine with detailed instructions. He looked at Caleb with something like gratitude. I'll come back tomorrow to check on her, he said quietly. And Mr. Rowan, thank you for reminding me what being a doctor actually means. After the doctor left, Caleb set about making the cabin livable. He built up the fire until heat actually filled the small space. He found the girls' cookpot and made broth from the salt pork and vegetables Anna had packed. He boiled water for Leona's medicine. He strung a blanket across one corner to give her privacy. Mira and June watched his every move like he might vanish if they blinked. Mr. Rowan? Mira asked quietly as he stirred the broth. Are you really going to stay? Or are you going to leave once Mama's better? The question cut deeper than she probably intended. Caleb had spent 3 years leaving towns, leaving people, leaving anything that might make him care. I'll stay until your mother's on her feet, he said. After that, we'll see. It wasn't a promise, but it was more than he'd given anyone in 3 years. June tugged on his sleeve. Will you really be our daddy for Christmas? Caleb's throat tightened. He knelt down so he was eye level with the little girl. I'll do my best to take care of you and your sister and your mama. That's what a daddy does, right? June threw her small arms around his neck, squeezing with surprising strength. Over her shoulder, Caleb saw Leona watching from the bed, tears streaming silently down her fever-flushed face. That night, after the girls had finally fallen asleep in their cots and the cabin was quiet except for Leona's labored breathing and the crackling fire, Caleb sat in a rickety chair beside her bed. Why? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Why are you really doing this? Caleb stared into the fire, seeing ghosts in the flames. I had a family once, he said quietly. Wife and son. 7 years ago. I was a U.S. Marshal, gone for weeks at a time chasing outlaws. Came home one day to find them dead. Raiders had hit the town. My wife tried to protect our boy. Didn't matter. They were both gone. Leona's eyes filled with understanding and shared pain. I'm sorry. Been drifting ever since. Couldn't stay in one place. Couldn't let myself care about anything or anyone because caring meant losing, and I couldn't... He stopped, surprised at how much he'd said. Your girls remind me of him. My son. The way they look at the world like it's supposed to be fair, supposed to be good, even though it keeps proving them wrong. They're strong, Leona whispered, like their father was. Tell me about him. About what he found. Leona's face hardened despite her weakness. Michael was a good man. Worked as a bookkeeper for the railway construction company. One day he noticed discrepancies, materials that were paid for but never delivered, receipts that didn't match inventories. He started digging and found that Garth Holloway was running a massive fraud. Cheap materials substituted for quality goods, the difference pocketed. Dangerous knowledge. Michael knew it. But he also knew people could die if those cheap materials failed. Railway bridges, trestles, buildings, all built with substandard goods. So he gathered evidence. Ledgers, receipts, testimonies from workers. He hid everything and planned to take it to the U.S. Marshal. But Holloway found out. Leona nodded, tears spilling over. 3 days before Michael was supposed to leave for Helena with the evidence, a beam fell at the construction site, crushed him. Sheriff called it an accident. Her voice broke. But I know Holloway had him killed. Where's the evidence now? I don't know. Michael said he hid it somewhere I'd never think to look, somewhere the girls would be safe. He said if anything happened to him, I'd find it when the time was right. She coughed, the effort clearly painful. But I've been too scared to search. Too sick. And Holloway's been circling, threatening to foreclose, to send the girls away. He won't, Caleb said firmly. Not while I'm here. Leona studied his face in the firelight. You can't fight a man like Holloway. He owns everything. The bank, the sheriff, half the businesses in town. He's got hired guns, political connections. I've fought men like Holloway before. Usually they're cowards underneath all that power. They rely on fear and money to protect them. Take those away and they crumble. And if they don't crumble? If they come after you? Caleb's hand unconsciously moved to the Colt at his hip. Then I stopped crumbling first. Leona reached out with a shaking hand and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was weak but desperate. Please don't die for us. Please don't let my girls watch another man die. Don't plan on dying, Caleb said gently. Plan on living. Plan on making sure you and your daughters have a future. Why? She whispered again. The question she couldn't stop asking. Why do you care? Caleb looked at the sleeping girls curled together in their cot for warmth. Looked at this dying woman fighting to stay alive for her children. Looked at the flickering fire that was all that stood between this family and the frozen darkness outside. Because 3 years ago, I stopped caring about anything, he said quietly, and it's been killing me slower than any bullet could. Maybe caring again is the only way to survive. Leona's eyes drifted closed, exhausted by fever and emotion. Thank you, she breathed, for being here, for being their daddy, even if it's just for Christmas. Caleb sat in the darkness, keeping watch, feeding the fire, listening to the 4 heartbeats that filled the cabin, 3 fragile lives and his own broken one, somehow beating together through the longest night of the year. Outside, Montana winter wrapped around the cabin like a fist. But inside, for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Rowan felt something he'd thought was dead forever. He felt needed. He felt responsible. He felt alive. And somewhere in the darkness, he knew Garth Holloway was planning his next move, because men like Holloway never stopped until they got what they wanted. The battle for this family hadn't started yet, but Caleb would be ready when it came. Dawn broke cold and pale over the Montana landscape, the sun struggling to pierce through layers of gray clouds. Caleb hadn't slept. He'd kept vigil through the night, stoking the fire every hour, checking Leona's fever with the back of his hand the way Dr. Morrison had shown him, listening to the ragged rhythm of her breathing gradually smooth into something less desperate. Around 5 in the morning, her fever finally broke. Sweat soaked through her nightgown as her body purged the worst of the infection, and when Caleb placed a cool cloth on her forehead, her eyes opened with clarity he hadn't seen before. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice hoarse but stronger. "Told you I would be. Most men say things they don't mean. I'm not most men." He helped her sit up slightly, supporting her shoulders. "Can you drink some broth? You need strength." She nodded weakly, and he brought the pot from the fire, spooning warm liquid carefully into her mouth. She managed half a bowl before exhaustion claimed her again, but it was progress. Mira stirred in her cot as pale light filtered through the cracked windows. She sat up instantly, her eyes finding her mother with that constant fear children develop when death circles too close. "Mama?" "I'm all right, sweet girl," Leona managed, her voice barely carrying across the small cabin. The fever broke. Mira scrambled from her cot and rushed to her mother's side, June right behind her. The relief on their faces was almost painful to witness. Too much fear for such young shoulders, too much responsibility. "Mr. Rowan stayed up all night," Mira said, looking at Caleb with something approaching awe. "He didn't sleep at all." "I've gone longer without sleep." Caleb stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting. "Your mother needs rest and food. I'm going to check the property, make sure everything's secure. Mira, can you keep the fire going?" "Yes, sir. And June, you stay close to your sister. Don't open the door for anyone but me or Dr. Morrison. Understand?" June nodded solemnly, her small face serious. "Are bad men coming?" The question hit Caleb square in the chest. How did you explain to a 5-year-old that yes, bad men existed, that they'd killed her father and wanted to destroy her family without stealing what little innocence she had left? "I won't let anyone hurt you," he said instead. It wasn't an answer, but it was a promise. He stepped outside into the bitter morning air. His breath formed white clouds as he surveyed the property in daylight. What he saw made his jaw tighten. The Ward homestead was worse than he'd realized. The fence had collapsed in at least 6 places. The small barn leaned dangerously to one side, its roof half caved in. The well pump was frozen solid. The chicken coop stood empty, its wire torn and useless. This family had been barely surviving even before Leona got sick. Caleb walked the perimeter, his lawman's instincts cataloging every vulnerability. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine forest, good cover for anyone approaching. The road from town offered a clear line of sight for maybe 200 yards. Only one door, 3 windows, all of them easy to breach. If Holloway sent men, and Caleb had no doubt he would, this place would be impossible to defend. He was examining the barn's structural damage when he heard hoofbeats. His hand dropped to his Colt as he turned toward the sound. A single rider emerged from the tree line, moving slowly, hands visible and empty. As the man drew closer, Caleb recognized the tin star pinned to his coat. Sheriff Dale Porter was in his late 40s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much compromise. He reined in his horse 20 feet from Caleb, keeping his hands carefully away from his gun. "You'd be the stranger helping the Ward family," Porter said. His voice was neutral, but tension radiated from every line of his body. "Caleb Rowan, Sheriff Dale Porter." He didn't dismount. "Mind telling me what business you have here?" "The girls asked for help. I'm providing it." Porter's eyes narrowed. "You a relation?" "Does it matter?" "Matters to Garth Holloway. He holds the note on this property. Claims the Wards are 3 months behind on payments. He's got legal right to foreclose." "Legal and right aren't always the same thing, Sheriff." A muscle twitched in Porter's jaw. "You a lawyer, Mr. Rowan?" "Used to be a U.S. Marshal, Oklahoma Territory." The sheriff's posture changed subtly, wariness replacing mere caution. "Used to be?" "Career change." Caleb's voice was flat. "The woman in that cabin is dying because your town turned its back on her. 2 little girls were out in the freezing cold on Christmas morning begging strangers for help because nobody else would. That sit right with you, Sheriff?" Porter's face flushed. "You don't know the situation. I know a dead man found evidence of corruption. I know he died 3 days before he could report it. I know his widow and children have been terrorized for months while good people looked the other way." Caleb's voice remained calm, but steel ran through it. "So you tell me, Sheriff, what exactly don't I know?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Porter's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. He took a long breath. "You need to leave," he said finally. "Tonight. Take your money and your good intentions and ride out. You stay here, you're going to get hurt." "That a threat?" "That's friendly advice from a man who's seen what Holloway does to people who interfere." Porter's voice dropped. "I got a wife and 3 kids, Mr. Rowan. I do what I have to do to keep them safe. You should do the same and get gone." "I made a promise to 2 little girls." "Then you're a fool." Porter gathered his reins. "Holloway knows you're here. Knows you paid for the doctor, bought supplies. He's not happy. He'll send men, probably tonight, and when they come, I won't be able to stop them." "Won't be able to? Or won't?" Porter's face went hard. "Don't judge me, Marshal. You don't know what it's like living under Holloway's thumb, watching him destroy anyone who crosses him, knowing there's nothing you can do." "There's always something you can do," Caleb interrupted. "You just have to be willing to pay the price." The sheriff stared at him for a long moment, something like shame flickering in his eyes. "The price is too high. For me, anyway." He turned his horse. "I came out here to warn you. That's all I can do. What you do with the warning is your business." "Sheriff?" Caleb's voice stopped him. "When you go home tonight and tuck your 3 kids into bed, remember there's 2 little girls in this cabin who deserve the same protection. Ask yourself if you can live with letting them face what's coming alone." Porter's shoulders hunched as if struck. He rode away without looking back. Caleb watched until the sheriff disappeared into the trees, then returned to the cabin. Inside, he found Mira trying to cook breakfast while June helped their mother drink water. The domestic scene was almost painfully normal, except for the fear that lingered in every movement, every glance. Who was that? Mira asked, her voice tight with worry. Sheriff. Came to check on your mother. It was a lie, and Mira's eyes said she knew it. But she was 8 years old and already understood that sometimes adults lied to protect children from harder truths. Caleb spent the morning fortifying what he could. He repaired the worst gaps in the fence using spare lumber from the collapsed barn. He cleared shooting lanes around the cabin, not that he told the girls that's what he was doing. He checked and rechecked his Colt, counting bullets. 12 rounds plus what was in the gun. Not much if Holloway sent a small army. Around noon, Dr. Morrison returned as promised. The doctor's hands shook as he examined Leona, but his medical assessment was solid. The fever's broken, he confirmed. The infection is responding to treatment. With rest and continued medication, she should recover fully in a week or two. Thank God, Leona breathed. Then to Caleb, thank you. I don't know how to... Don't. Caleb's voice was gentle. Just get better. That's thanks enough. After checking Leona, Dr. Morrison pulled Caleb aside. His face was pale with fear. Holloway knows I came here, he said quietly. His men were waiting outside my office this morning. Told me if I came back, there'd be consequences. You came anyway, because you were right. I'm a doctor. I took an oath. Morrison's voice shook. But my wife is terrified. She wants me to leave town, start over somewhere Holloway can't reach us. Maybe you should. Maybe I should have years ago, before I let fear make me a coward. The doctor looked toward Leona's bed. She's strong, that woman. Stronger than me. She lost her husband but kept fighting for her daughters. I can't even fight for my own conscience. You fought today, Caleb said. That counts for something. Morrison gave him a sad smile. Does it? Or does it just make me a target? He gathered his bag. I'll try to come back tomorrow, but I can't promise. If I don't make it, there's enough medicine for 5 more days. After that, she'll be well enough not to need it. I hope you're right. Morrison paused at the door. Anna McRae sent something for you. She said you'd understand. He handed Caleb a small wrapped package. After the doctor left, Caleb opened the package. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small Derringer pistol. The note read, For the girls, if the worst happens. Better they have a chance. A.M. Caleb's throat tightened. The gesture was both practical and heartbreaking. A shopkeeper preparing children to defend themselves against the corruption that had consumed their town. He slipped the Derringer into his coat. He wouldn't give it to Mira unless absolutely necessary, but knowing it was there provided grim comfort. The afternoon passed in tense quiet. Caleb showed Mira how to bar the door from inside. He positioned pots of water near the fire, ostensibly for cleaning, but really for throwing at attackers if they breached the cabin. He moved the girls' cots to the far corner, away from windows. June watched his preparations with wide, frightened eyes. The bad men are coming, aren't they? Caleb knelt beside her. Maybe, maybe not. But if they do, I'll be ready, and so will you. I'm scared. Being scared is smart. Being scared means you understand danger, but being brave means doing what's right even when you're scared. He touched her cheek gently. Your daddy was brave, wasn't he? June nodded, tears welling up. Then you be brave like him. Take care of your sister. Take care of your mama. Can you do that? Yes, sir. As sunset approached, painting the sky in shades of blood, orange, and purple, Leona called Caleb to her bedside. Her color had improved dramatically, though she remained weak. You think they'll come tonight, she said. Not a question. Sheriff seemed to think so. Then you should leave. Take your horse and go before... We've had this conversation. Caleb. She used his first name for the first time, and something in her voice made him meet her eyes. I won't let another good man die for my family. Michael died because of what he found. If you die too, I'm harder to kill than your husband was. No offense to his memory. This isn't a joke. No, it's not. Caleb sat on the edge of her bed. But running won't solve anything. Holloway won't stop just because I leave. He'll come after you anyway. Slower maybe, but just as certain. At least this way you've got someone who knows how to fight. Leona's eyes searched his face. Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's because my daughters asked you to. There's something more. Caleb was silent for a long moment. Outside, the last light was fading. Soon it would be full dark, the perfect time for violent men to do their work. My wife's name was Sarah, he said quietly. My son was Thomas. Tommy. He was 6 when he died. Smart as a whip, always asking questions, always wanting to help with everything. His voice caught. The day the raiders came, I was 200 miles away chasing a cattle rustler. By the time I got home, my family had been dead for 3 days. Sarah had been shot protecting Tommy. Tommy had been shot anyway. Leona's hand found his, her grip surprisingly strong. I hunted those raiders for a year, Caleb continued. Found every last one of them. Brought them to justice, some in courtrooms, some in the street. And when it was over, when they were all dead or hanged, I realized it didn't matter. My family was still gone, and I'd become someone Sarah wouldn't have recognized, someone Tommy would have been afraid of. So you started drifting. So I started running. From responsibility, from connection, from anything that might make me care again. Because caring meant losing, and I couldn't survive another loss. He looked at Mira and June, playing quietly in the corner. But your daughters grabbed my boot and called me daddy, and something in me broke. Or maybe it finally started healing. I don't know. What I do know is that I can't walk away, not this time. Leona's eyes filled with tears. You're a good man, Caleb Rowan. I'm a broken man trying to do one decent thing. That's what good men are, she whispered. Broken people who keep trying anyway. Before Caleb could respond, his instincts flared. A sound, distant but distinct. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses moving fast. He was on his feet instantly, hand on his gun. Mira, bar the door. June, get in the corner with your sister, now. The girls moved without question, their faces pale. Leona tried to sit up. How many? Caleb moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the clearing. He counted shapes emerging from the tree line. 7 riders, he said grimly, all armed. 7 against 1. Leona's voice shook. Caleb, please. Stay quiet. Keep the girls calm. He checked his Colt, the familiar weight settling his nerves. And if I tell you to run, you run. Don't argue. Don't look back. Just take your daughters and run for the woods. Where would we go? Anna McRae at the general store. She'll help you. He turned to face her. Promise me, Leona. Promise if it goes bad, you'll save your girls. Leona's face was white, but determined. I promise. But you promise me something too. You come back alive. Those girls have already lost one father. They can't lose another. The hoofbeats grew louder. Caleb could hear men's voices now, rough and confident. They weren't trying to be quiet. They wanted the family to hear them coming, to be afraid. He moved to the door, positioning himself where he could see through a gap in the boards. 7 men reined in their horses 30 yards from the cabin. Moonlight glinted off gun barrels and something else, bottles with rags stuffed in their necks. Fire, Caleb muttered. They're planning to burn us out. From the corner, June whimpered. Mira held her close, her young face set with determination that was heartbreaking to see. One of the riders moved forward, a big man with a scarred face and a voice like gravel. Leona Ward, we know you're in there. Mr. Holloway wants to talk about your property debt. Don't answer, Caleb whispered. The big man continued. You got until I count to 10 to come out peaceable. After that, we start persuading you. Caleb's mind raced. 7 men, bottles of fire, 1 door, 3 windows. If they surrounded the cabin and lit it up, everyone inside would have 2 choices, burn or run out into gunfire, unless he gave them something else to focus on. 1, the big man shouted. Caleb looked at Leona, at Mira holding June, at the family he'd known for less than 24 hours but somehow couldn't abandon. 2, he made his decision. 3, Caleb unbarred the door. 4. What are you doing? Leona hissed. 5. Giving them what they want, Caleb said. Me. 6. He stepped outside before anyone could stop him, closing the door behind him. The night air hit his face like a slap, cold and sharp. 7 pairs of eyes fixed on him with predatory interest. Well now, the big man said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Who do we have here? Name's Caleb Rowan. I'm the one who paid for the doctor, bought the supplies. Got a problem with that? Mr. Holloway does. The big man spat tobacco juice. He don't like strangers interfering in his business. Funny, I don't like bullies terrorizing widows and children. The smile vanished from the big man's face. You got a smart mouth, stranger. Let's see if you're smart enough to walk away while you still can. I'm smart enough to recognize hired thugs when I see them, Caleb said calmly. Question is, are you smart enough to realize you're working for a man who kills honest workers and steals from families? One of the other riders shifted in his saddle. We just do what we're paid for. You're paid to murder children? Caleb let his voice carry across the clearing. Because that's what burning this cabin means. 2 little girls, 8 and 5 years old. You ready to live with that? Shut your mouth, the big man snarled. But Caleb had seen the flash of uncertainty in some of the other faces. Here's how this goes, Caleb continued. You ride back to Holloway. Tell him the Ward family has protection now. Tell him if he wants this property, he'll have to go through legal channels. And tell him if any of you come back here threatening this family, I'll make sure every person in Elkridge knows exactly what kind of coward he is. The big man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You hear that, boys? 1 man against 7, and he's giving orders. 1 man who used to be a U.S. Marshal, Caleb said quietly. 1 man who's tracked and taken down men meaner and better armed than you. 1 man who's got nothing left to lose. That last part hit home. Caleb saw it in their faces, the realization that a man with nothing to lose was the most dangerous kind. The big man's hand moved toward his gun. Tough talk for someone standing in the open. I'm standing in the open so you can see me clearly when I tell you this. First man who draws dies. Might not be the only one who dies, but he'll definitely be first. Any of you want to test how fast I am? The silence that followed was broken only by nervous horses shifting and the whisper of wind through pine trees. 7 men, 7 guns against 1. But none of them moved, because none of them wanted to be first. This ain't over, the big man finally said. Mr. Holloway don't take kindly to being threatened. Then Mr. Holloway should stop sending boys to do a man's work. Caleb's voice was ice. Now get off this property before I decide talking is finished. For a moment, the tension was so thick it was almost visible. Then one of the riders turned his horse. Then another. The big man sat frozen for a long moment, rage and humiliation warring on his face. You just made a powerful enemy, he spat. Won't be my first. Won't be my last. The big man finally turned his horse, but his parting words carried clear malice. We'll be back, with more men, and next time we won't talk first. They rode away, 7 shapes melting into the darkness. But Caleb didn't relax. This wasn't a victory, it was a delay, and delays only worked if you used them well. He turned back to the cabin and found Leona standing in the doorway, Mira and June clutching her nightgown. Even in her weakened state, she'd been ready to defend her children. You're insane, she said, but there was admiration in her voice alongside the fear. I've been called worse. He ushered them back inside. But they'll be back, probably tomorrow night with twice as many men. We need to find your husband's evidence, and we need to find it now. I told you, I don't know where... Think, Leona. Your husband said you'd find it when the time was right. He said the girls would be safe. What did he mean? Leona sank onto her bed, exhaustion and stress catching up with her. I don't know. I've looked everywhere. Under floorboards, in the barn, through all his belongings. Mama? Mira interrupted quietly. What about Papa's special place? Everyone turned to look at her. The little girl's face was thoughtful, remembering. What special place, sweet girl? Leona asked. The place Papa used to take me sometimes. He said it was our secret spot, where he went to think. He made me promise never to tell anyone, not even you, because it was just for us. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry I kept it secret, Mama. Leona pulled her daughter close. Oh, baby, it's all right. Can you show us this place? Mira nodded. It's in the barn. There's a loose board in the back wall. Behind it is a space big enough for a box. Caleb was already moving. Show me. They went out into the cold night, Caleb carrying a lantern and his gun. The barn loomed like a skeletal creature in the moonlight, its damaged roof casting strange shadows. Mira led them to the back wall, her small hand running along the weathered boards until she found the right one. Here! Caleb set down the lantern and pulled. The board came away easily, revealing a hollow space in the wall. Inside was a metal box, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. Caleb lifted it out with hands that wanted to shake. This was it. The evidence that had cost Michael Ward his life. The truth that could bring down Garth Holloway, or get them all killed trying. Back in the cabin, they opened the box on the table. Inside were ledgers, receipts, contracts, and a detailed journal in Michael Ward's careful handwriting. Page after page of evidence. Materials bought at bottom prices but billed at premium rates. Bribes paid to railway officials. Payoffs to Sheriff Porter and other local authorities. Threats made against workers who questioned the quality of supplies. And at the back of the journal, a list of deaths. Workers who died in accidents at the construction site. 14 names in total, each followed by dates and suspicious circumstances. "Dear God," Leona whispered. "Michael knew about all of this. All these men." "He was building a case," Caleb said, flipping through pages. "A solid case. This would have been enough to bring in federal marshals, maybe even trigger a congressional investigation. No wonder Holloway had him killed." "What do we do with it?" Leona asked. "We take it public. Tomorrow. We go into town, gather witnesses, and we expose everything Holloway's done." "He'll kill us before we get halfway to town," Leona said desperately. "You saw how many men he sent tonight. Tomorrow he'll send an army." "Then we don't wait for tomorrow." Caleb stood, decision made. "Leona, you and the girls stay here. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Dr. Morrison. I'm riding to town tonight." "Alone? That's suicide." "It's the only way. Holloway's men will be watching this place, expecting me to stay and defend it. They won't expect me to go on the offensive." He gathered the evidence carefully, wrapping it back in its oilcloth. "There's a U.S. Marshal's office in Helena. That's 3 days' hard ride from here. But there's a telegraph office in Elkridge. I send a wire tonight. We could have federal marshals here in 72 hours. And if you don't make it to the telegraph office," Caleb met her eyes, "then you take this evidence, take your girls, and you run. Head east to Helena. Find Marshal James Crawford. We served together in Oklahoma. Tell him everything. He'll help you." "Caleb, promise me, Leona." She looked at him for a long moment, this broken man who'd stumbled into their lives less than a day ago and somehow become their only hope. Then she nodded. "I promise, but you come back, you hear me? Those girls have been asking when Daddy Caleb will teach them to ride." "Don't you dare make me explain that another daddy isn't coming home." The words hit Caleb square in the chest. Daddy Caleb. Somehow, in the space of a single day, he'd gone from a drifter running from his past to a father figure to 2 little girls who'd lost everything. He knelt down in front of Mira and June. "I need you both to be very brave tonight. Can you do that?" They nodded solemnly. "I'm going to town to send for help. While I'm gone, you protect your mama. Keep the door barred. Keep the fire going. If anyone tries to come in who isn't me or the doctor, you hide in that special place your papa showed you. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Mira whispered. June threw her arms around his neck. "Come back, Daddy Caleb. Please come back." Caleb's throat closed up. He held the little girl for a moment, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the desperate trust in her embrace. "I'll come back," he promised. "I always keep my promises." He stood, settling his hat on his head and checking his gun one more time. Leona walked him to the door. "Caleb Rowan," she said softly, "you're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest." "Probably both." He managed a small smile. "Keep them safe, Leona. Whatever happens, keep them safe. You keep yourself safe too. We need you." The words hung in the cold air between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Then Caleb stepped out into the night. His roan mare nickered softly as he approached, as if sensing the danger ahead. He mounted up, the evidence secured in his saddlebag, and turned toward the dark road to Elkridge. Behind him, he could feel 3 pairs of eyes watching from the cabin window. A dying woman and 2 little girls, their entire future balanced on whether he could survive the next few hours. Caleb touched his heels to his mare's flanks and rode into the darkness, toward a town owned by corruption, carrying the only evidence that could set a family free. And somewhere ahead, Garth Holloway was waiting. The road to Elkridge cut through darkness so complete it felt like riding into the mouth of oblivion. Caleb kept his mare at a steady pace, fast enough to make time, but slow enough to listen for ambush. The moon provided just enough light to follow the frozen ruts, and the only sounds were hoofbeats and the whisper of wind through pine branches. He'd covered maybe a mile when his instinct screamed warning. The mare felt it too, her ears flicking forward nervously. Caleb's hand moved to his Colt as he scanned the tree line. The shot came from his left, the muzzle flash bright in the darkness. The bullet whined past his head close enough to feel the displacement of air. Caleb threw himself from the saddle as a second shot rang out, rolling as he hit the frozen ground and coming up with his gun drawn. Two riders burst from the trees, firing as they came. Caleb's first shot took the nearest one in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. His second shot missed it as his target's horse reared. The remaining rider charged straight at him, gun blazing. Caleb dove behind a fallen log as bullets chewed bark inches from his head. He counted shots. The rider had fired 4 times, probably had 2 left in a 6-shooter. The man wheeled his horse, trying to get an angle on Caleb's position. Caleb rose and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet caught the rider in the chest. He toppled backward off his horse with a cry that cut off abruptly when he hit the ground. The wounded man was crawling toward the trees, leaving a dark trail in the snow. Caleb approached carefully, gun ready, and kicked the man's weapon away. "Who sent you?" Caleb demanded. The man looked up with hatred in his eyes. "Go to hell. You first, unless you start talking. Who sent you?" "You know who." The man coughed, blood on his lips. "Mr. Holloway don't like people sticking their noses in his business. He send you to kill me or just scare me?" "Does it matter?" The man's breathing was labored. "You're a dead man either way. You and that widow and those brats? Holloway's gonna burn that cabin with all of them inside, and there ain't nothing you can do to stop it." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Where is he? Holloway? Where does he live?" The man laughed wetly. "Like I'd tell you, you'll never get close enough to—" He died mid-sentence, his eyes going glassy. Caleb stood over the body for a moment, rage and frustration warring in his chest. 2 men dead, and he still didn't know how many more Holloway had or when they'd strike. He caught his mare, who'd stopped 50 yards down the road, and checked her for injuries. Finding none, he mounted up and rode on, but the ambush had cost him precious time and confirmed his worst fear. Holloway knew his movements, probably had men watching the cabin right now, which meant Leona and the girls were in immediate danger. Caleb urged his mare faster, the need to reach town warring with the urge to turn back and protect the family he'd left vulnerable. But turning back accomplished nothing. The only way to truly protect them was to expose Holloway's corruption so thoroughly that even his hired guns would abandon him. The lights of Elk Ridge appeared ahead like scattered stars. The town was quiet at this hour, most businesses dark, only the saloon showing signs of life. Caleb rode straight for the telegraph office, a small building next to the railway depot. It was locked. Of course it was, past midnight on Christmas night. Caleb hammered on the door anyway. "Telegraph operator, open up! Emergency!" No response. He tried again, louder, then stepped back and considered kicking the door in. Before he could, a voice called from down the street. "Office is closed, friend. Come back in the morning." Caleb turned to see a man approaching from the direction of the saloon. Middle-aged, slightly drunk, wearing a telegraph operator's visor pushed back on his head. "You the operator?" Caleb asked. "Martin Hayes, at your service. But like I said, office is closed until—" "I need to send an urgent wire to the U.S. Marshal's office in Helena, right now. I'll pay triple rate." Hayes squinted at him. "Triple rate, you say?" He swayed slightly. "Must be mighty important. Life and death." Something in Caleb's voice must have cut through the alcohol fog because Hayes straightened slightly. "You're the fellow helping the Ward family. Heard about you. Word travels fast in a small town." "Then you know why I need to send this wire." Hayes looked around nervously. "Look, friend, I got sympathy for those folks, but Garth Holloway practically owns this town. He finds out I helped you." Caleb pulled out a gold coin, one of his last. $10. Send one wire, and I walk away. No one has to know you helped me." Hayes stared at the coin, temptation and fear fighting across his face. "What's the message?" "To Marshal James Crawford, Helena. Message reads, evidence of fraud, murder, corruption in Elk Ridge, Montana. Banker Garth Holloway responsible. Multiple deaths. Federal intervention required immediately. Caleb Rowan, former U.S. Marshal, Oklahoma Territory. Hayes's eyes widened. You're a marshal? Was. Now I'm just someone trying to stop children from being murdered. Caleb held out the coin. Will you help me? The operator took a long breath, looking at the coin, then at Caleb's face. Whatever he saw there made his decision. Come on, he muttered, fumbling for his keys. But we make this quick. Holloway's got men everywhere. Inside the office, Hayes lit a lamp and moved to his telegraph key with the practiced efficiency of long experience. His fingers worked the key, tapping out Caleb's message in rapid Morse code. The sound filled the small room, urgent, staccato, carrying a plea for help across hundreds of miles of wire. Message sent, Hayes said after a few minutes. Should reach Helena within the hour, whether they respond. He shrugged. They'll respond. Crawford's a good man. Hayes pocketed the coin, but his face remained troubled. Look, I don't know what you're planning, but you need to understand something about Holloway. He's not just rich and connected. He's smart, ruthless. He's been building his empire here for 15 years, and anyone who's tried to stop him has ended up dead or run out of town. Michael Ward tried to stop him. And Michael Ward is dead. Hayes's voice dropped. You seem like a decent fellow. My advice? Take those girls and their mother and run. Get as far from here as you can and don't look back. I'm tired of running. Then you're a fool, or a dead man, probably both. Caleb stood to leave, then paused. If something happens to me, make sure that wire gets to Crawford. Make sure he knows about the evidence. What evidence? Caleb patted his saddlebag. Everything he needs to bring Holloway down. Every bribe, every death, every fraudulent contract. Michael Ward documented it all. Hayes's face went pale. You're carrying that around? Do you have any idea if Holloway's men catch you with that, they won't? Your funeral. But Hayes's eyes held something like respect. For what it's worth, I hope you survive this. This town could use a few less cowards and a few more fools willing to fight. Caleb left the telegraph office and stood in the dark street, weighing his options. The wire was sent, but help wouldn't arrive for at least 3 days. In that time, Holloway would make his move. The question was whether to return to the cabin or take the fight directly to Holloway. The decision was made for him when he heard hoofbeats, multiple horses, coming fast from the north, from the direction of the Ward cabin. Caleb's blood went cold. He'd left Leona and the girls alone, and Holloway had sent his men while Caleb was in town. The ambush on the road had been a diversion, pulling him away from the people he'd sworn to protect. He was in the saddle and riding hard before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The mare sensed his urgency and gave everything she had, hooves pounding the frozen road. Behind him, Elk Ridge receded into darkness. Ahead, the forest swallowed him whole. He'd covered half the distance when he saw the orange glow against the night sky. Fire. The cabin was on fire. Caleb kicked his mare into a full gallop, heedless of the danger, thinking only of 2 little girls who'd called him daddy and a woman who'd trusted him to keep them safe. The glow grew brighter as he approached, and now he could smell smoke on the wind. He burst into the clearing and his heart nearly stopped. The cabin was indeed burning, but not the way he'd feared. Only the small barn was engulfed in flames, the old structure going up like kindling. In the yard, 7 mounted men surrounded the cabin in a loose circle. The big man from earlier sat his horse directly in front of the door, a torch in his hand. "Last chance, Mrs. Ward," he shouted. "Come out peaceful, and we'll let you and the girls leave with your lives. Stay inside and you burn with the cabin." From inside, Caleb heard Mira's voice, high and frightened but defiant. "Daddy, Caleb said don't open the door for nobody. He said he's coming back." The big man laughed. "Your daddy ain't coming back, little girl. He's dead on the road about 2 miles from here. Now your mama can come out, or you can all die. What's it gonna be?" Caleb dismounted silently, leaving his mare in the tree line. 7 men, all armed, all focused on the cabin. He had surprise on his side, but not much else. 7 against 1 were bad odds even for an experienced gunfighter. Unless he changed the equation. He moved through the darkness, circling wide, using the burning barn as cover. The flames cast dancing shadows that worked in his favor, masking his approach. He reached a position behind and to the left of the riders, close enough to hear their muttered conversations. "Just burn them out," one man was saying. "Standing out here in the cold is stupid." "Boss wants the woman alive if possible," another replied. "Says she might know where Ward hid the evidence." "What evidence?" "Don't know, don't care. I just want to get paid and get warm." Caleb raised his Colt, sighted carefully, and shot the nearest man out of his saddle. Chaos erupted instantly. Men shouted, horses reared, guns came out firing blindly into the darkness. Caleb had already moved, diving behind a water trough as bullets chewed the ground where he'd been standing. "It's him!" someone yelled. "The marshal! He's alive! Find him!" the big man roared. $50 to whoever brings me his head!" 3 men spurred their horses toward Caleb's position. He waited until they were committed, then rose and fired 3 times. 2 men fell. The third wheeled his horse and fled back toward the others. "He's behind the trough!" another voice called. Bullets slammed into the wooden trough, water spraying through the holes. Caleb rolled left, came up firing, dropped another man. 4 down, 3 to go. But the remaining 3 had found cover and were no longer panicking. They spread out, trying to flank him. The big man dismounted and moved toward the cabin with his torch. Come out, Marshal," he called, "or I throw this torch through the window and we see how fast that cabin burns." Caleb's mind raced. He couldn't let them burn the cabin, but if he revealed his position to stop the big man, the other 2 would kill him. He needed a distraction, something to... The cabin door flew open. Leona stood in the doorway, pale and weak, but holding Michael's old rifle. Behind her, Mira clutched June, both girls' faces streaked with tears. "You want to burn us?" Leona's voice was steady despite her trembling hands. "You'll have to shoot me first, and I promise you, I'll take at least one of you with me." The big man stopped, torch raised. "Lady, you're in no condition to..." Leona pulled the trigger. The shot went wide but close enough to make the big man stumble backward. She levered another round, and this time her aim was steadier. "My husband documented every dirty deal Garth Holloway ever made," she said, her voice carrying across the yard. "Every bribe, every murder, every stolen dollar. And that evidence is already on its way to the U.S. Marshals in Helena. So you can kill us if you want, but it won't save your boss. He's finished either way." The big man's face twisted with rage. "You're lying." "Am I?" Leona's smile was bitter. "Ask Caleb Rowan." "Oh, wait, you can't because he's standing right behind you." It was a bluff, but the big man couldn't help himself. He turned his head to check, and in that split second of distraction, Caleb rose from cover and fired. The bullet took the big man in the leg. He went down hard, the torch flying from his hand and landing harmlessly in the snow. The other 2 riders broke and ran, spurring their horses toward the tree line. Caleb let them go. He was already running toward the cabin, toward Leona, who was swaying on her feet, toward the girls who were crying and calling his name. He reached them just as Leona's strength gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground, and suddenly he had an armful of trembling women and 2 little girls wrapping themselves around his legs. "Daddy Caleb," June sobbed. "They said you were dead." "Takes more than that to kill me," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. He looked at Leona. "You shouldn't have come out. Could have gotten yourself killed." "So could you." Her eyes met his. "But you came back anyway." "Told you I would." Mira was crying into his coat. "We were so scared. The barn caught fire and the bad men came, and Mama said we had to be brave, but I was so scared." "You were brave," Caleb said, kneeling so he could look at both girls. "You were so brave. I'm proud of you, both of you." The big man groaned from where he lay in the snow, clutching his wounded leg. Caleb stood, his gun still ready, and walked over to him. "Here's what's going to happen," Caleb said quietly. "You're going to ride back to Holloway. Tell him his evidence is already with the federal marshals. Tell him this family is under my protection, and the next man who comes here dies. Understand?" The big man spat blood. "Holloway will kill me for failing." "Then you'd better hope you can ride faster than he can shoot." Caleb hauled him to his feet and shoved him toward his horse. "Get out of here, and take your dead with you. I don't want their bodies stinking up this property." The big man limped to his horse, the other 2 riders emerging from the trees to help load the bodies. Within minutes, they'd ridden away, leaving only bloodstains in the snow and the burning barn casting its hellish glow. Caleb turned back to find Leona still standing in the doorway, the rifle now lowered, her face pale as death. He reached her just as her knees buckled again. "Inside," he said, lifting her easily. "You are burning through strength you don't have." "Had to help," she whispered. "Couldn't let them burn my girls." "I know, but now you need to rest." He carried her inside and laid her gently on the bed. Mira and June pressed close, their small hands reaching for their mother. The cabin was cold. The fire had burned low during the fight, and Caleb immediately set about building it back up. As warmth began to fill the space again, he checked the door and windows, making sure they were secure. The barn was still burning outside, but the cabin itself was untouched. They'd survived, but barely. "Caleb," Leona's voice was weak. "Did you send the wire?" "Sent it. Crawford should get it by morning. Help will come, but it'll take 3 days, maybe 4. "And Holloway?" "Knows we have the evidence, knows he's running out of time." Caleb sat in the chair beside her bed. "He'll make one more push. Everything he's got. Probably tomorrow night." "How many men does he have?" "More than I can fight alone." Caleb looked at the girls, both of them exhausted but still refusing to sleep, afraid of what might happen if they closed their eyes. "We need to leave. Get you and the girls somewhere safe until the marshals arrive." "Where?" Leona asked. "He controls the whole town. There's nowhere to go." Caleb thought about Anna McRae, the shopkeeper who'd helped him, about Dr. Morrison who'd defied Holloway to treat Leona, about the telegraph operator who'd sent the wire despite his fear. Not everyone in Elkridge was under Holloway's thumb. Some people were just waiting for someone to stand up first. "The church," Caleb said suddenly. "It's neutral ground, and it's the biggest building in town. If we can get there, gather witnesses, make everything public, Holloway can't massacre people in a church without destroying whatever reputation he has left." "He doesn't care about reputation," Leona said. "No, but his political connections do. He's been working with railway officials, probably territorial representatives. Those men care very much about public perception." Caleb leaned forward. "We take the evidence to the church. We invite the whole town. We read Michael's journal out loud where everyone can hear. We make it so public that even Holloway's hired guns won't dare touch us." "That's insane." "So is staying here waiting to be burned out?" Caleb met her eyes. "It's a risk, but it's our best chance." Leona looked at her daughters, then back at Caleb. "When?" "Tomorrow, Christmas night. Everyone will be in town anyway. We show up with the evidence, make our stand in front of God and everybody. And if it doesn't work, then at least we go down fighting instead of hiding." Silence filled the cabin. Outside, the barn fire was finally dying down, the flames giving way to embers and ash. Inside, the 4 of them huddled together, a makeshift family bound by crisis and courage. "All right," Leona finally said. "We do it your way. But Caleb, if things go bad, you get my girls out. Promise me." "Leona's, promise me." Her voice cracked. "I can't lose them. They're all I have left of Michael. If I die, I need to know someone will take care of them." Caleb looked at Mira and June, these 2 brave little girls who'd grabbed his boot and changed his life. The thought of them facing the world alone, of ending up on the orphan train their mother feared so much, was unbearable. "I promise," he said quietly, "but you're not dying. We're all getting through this together." Mira suddenly spoke up, her voice small but determined. "Daddy Caleb? Are you going to stay? After the bad men are gone? Are you going to stay with us?" The question hung in the air. Caleb had spent 3 years running, 3 years refusing to put down roots or make connections. But somewhere in the past 2 days, these 3 people had become more than just strangers in need. They'd become something he'd thought he'd lost forever. They'd become family. "Yeah," he heard himself say. "Yeah, I'm staying." June threw herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Mira followed, and then Leona was reaching out too, and suddenly Caleb was surrounded by the people he'd sworn to protect, their tears mixing with his own. For the first time in 3 years, the empty place in his chest where his family used to be felt a little less hollow. They spent the rest of the night taking turns sleeping, always keeping watch, always listening for hoofbeats that might signal another attack. But none came. Holloway was regrouping, planning his final move. As dawn broke gray and cold, Caleb stood at the window and watched the skeletal remains of the barn smoking in the pale light. He thought about the fight ahead, about the slim chances of survival, about the family counting on him to keep them safe. And for the first time in years, he felt something other than grief and guilt. He felt purpose. "Whatever happens today," Leona said from her bed, watching him with eyes that held too much understanding, "thank you for giving us hope, for giving my girls a reason to believe good men still exist." Caleb turned to face her. "Your husband was a good man. He died trying to do the right thing. The least I can do is finish what he started." "He would have liked you," she said softly. "Michael always said the world needed more men willing to stand against the darkness. Then let's make sure his death meant something." Caleb checked his gun, counted his remaining bullets. "Not enough. Never enough. Get some rest. Tonight, we end this." The day passed in tense preparation. Caleb cleaned and loaded every gun in the cabin. He helped Leona dress in her best clothes, the black dress she'd worn to Michael's funeral. He made sure Mira and June looked presentable, their hair combed, their faces clean. They were going to church, and they were bringing truth with them. As the sun began its descent toward evening, casting long shadows across the snow, Caleb hitched the girls' old mare to their small wagon. He helped Leona up onto the seat, wrapped the girls in blankets beside her. "You sure you're strong enough for this?" he asked Leona one more time. She met his eyes with fierce determination. "I've been strong enough to survive my husband's murder, to fight pneumonia, to face down armed men. I'm strong enough to see Garth Holloway face justice." Caleb climbed up beside her, the evidence secured in a satchel at his feet. He took the reins and looked back at the cabin one last time, this small, damaged building that had somehow become worth fighting for. "Let's go finish this," he said. The wagon rolled forward, carrying 4 lives toward their final confrontation with the man who'd destroyed their family and terrorized their town. Behind them, the burned barn stood like a memorial to all they'd lost. Ahead, the church steeple rose against the darkening sky, waiting for truth to walk through its doors. And in his office in town, Garth Holloway was gathering his forces, preparing to crush the last resistance to his empire. The final battle was coming, and only one side would survive it. The wagon wheels creaked through the frozen ruts as they approached Elkridge, each revolution carrying them closer to either salvation or destruction. Caleb kept his hand near his Colt, eyes scanning the tree line for ambush. Beside him, Leona sat straight-backed despite her weakness, while Mira and June huddled together in the wagon bed, their small faces pale but determined. The town came into view as twilight deepened, windows glowing with lamplight, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked peaceful, ordinary, like a place where terrible things couldn't happen. But Caleb knew better. Evil rarely announced itself with fanfare. It hid behind respectability and power, wearing a smile while it destroyed lives. As they rolled down the main street, curtains twitched in windows. People emerged onto porches, watching with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Word had spread fast about the confrontation at the Ward cabin, about the burning barn and the dead men. Everyone knew something was coming. The church stood at the far end of town, its white clapboard walls and modest steeple a stark contrast to the brick and brass ostentation of Holloway's bank across the street. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the church steps and helped Leona down, acutely aware of the eyes watching from every direction. "Quite the audience," Leona murmured. "Good. That's what we need." Caleb lifted June down, then Mira, keeping the girls close. More witnesses means Holloway has to be careful. The church door opened and Reverend Thomas Whitmore stepped out, a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes and worry carved deep into his weathered face. He'd buried Michael Ward 4 months ago, and the guilt of it still showed. "Mrs. Ward," he said gently, "I heard you were ill. You shouldn't be out in this cold." "I'm well enough for what needs doing, Reverend," Leona's voice carried clearly. "I need to use the church. Tonight. For a gathering." Whitmore glanced nervously toward Holloway's bank. "What kind of gathering?" "The truth-telling kind." Caleb stepped forward, the satchel in his hand. "We have evidence of corruption, fraud and murder. Evidence that involves the most powerful man in this town, and we're going to share it with anyone brave enough to listen. The Reverend's face went pale. Mr. Rowan, I understand your intentions are good, but bringing this kind of trouble to the Lord's house. The Lord's house is exactly where truth belongs, Leona interrupted. My husband died trying to expose Garth Holloway's crimes. The least this town can do is hear what he discovered. Garth Holloway is a generous benefactor to this church. He paid for our new roof, He paid for your silence, Caleb said bluntly. Same way he's paid for everyone else's. But blood money doesn't buy redemption, Reverend. It just makes you complicit. Whitmore flinched as if struck. His hands trembled as he gripped his Bible. You're asking me to choose between my conscience and my church's survival. I'm asking you to choose between right and wrong, Leona said softly. The way my husband chose, the way he died for. The Reverend stood frozen for a long moment, the weight of decision visible on his face. Then he looked down at Mira and June, these two small girls who'd lost their father to corruption and nearly lost their mother too. The church is yours, he said quietly. For tonight, anyway. Tomorrow I may not have a church left, but tonight it belongs to the truth. Relief flooded through Caleb. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Whitmore opened the door wider. Holloway will come. You know that, don't you? He won't let this happen without a fight. I'm counting on it. They moved inside the church, a simple space with wooden pews and a small altar. Caleb positioned Leona and the girls near the front while he stood by the door, watching the street through a window. People were already gathering outside, shopkeepers, workers, families drawn by curiosity and the promise of drama. Anna McRae arrived within minutes, carrying lanterns and an expression of fierce determination. Figured you'd need extra light, she said, setting them up around the church. And extra courage. I brought both. Thank you, Anna. Don't thank me, just make sure this means something. She looked at Leona with eyes full of old grief. Michael was my friend. He deserved better than what this town gave him. Dr. Morrison came next, his medical bag in hand and his wife clutching his arm. Mrs. Morrison looked terrified but stood by her husband as he approached Leona. I'm here, he said simply. Whatever you need. More people trickled in, the telegraph operator Martin Hayes looking sober and scared, old Mrs. Chen who ran the laundry, the Dawson family who owned the feed store, workers from the railway construction site, men whose friends had died in the accidents Michael Ward had documented. Within an hour, 30 people filled the church, with more standing outside in the cold, unwilling to commit but unable to look away. Caleb watched them gather and felt something shift in the air. These weren't brave people or powerful people. They were ordinary folks who'd lived under Holloway's thumb for so long they'd forgotten what freedom looked like. But they were here. That counted for something. It's time, he said to Leona. She stood, steadying herself against the pew. Mira and June flanked her like small sentinels as she moved to the front of the church. The murmuring crowd fell silent. Most of you knew my husband, Leona began, her voice quiet but carrying in the hushed space. Michael Ward. You knew him as a bookkeeper, a neighbor, a friend. You came to his funeral and told me how sorry you were, how tragic the accident was. She paused, gathering strength. But it wasn't an accident. Michael was murdered because he discovered the truth about Garth Holloway's business dealings, because he documented fraud that stolen thousands from the railway company and compromised the safety of every structure being built in this territory, because he found proof of 14 other deaths, men killed when they got too close to the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably, but no one left. Caleb opened the satchel and removed Michael Ward's journal, holding it up so everyone could see. This journal contains everything. Receipts showing materials purchased at bottom prices but billed at premium rates. Testimony from workers who were threatened into silence. A list of men who died under suspicious circumstances when they questioned the quality of supplies. He opened to a random page and read aloud. March 15th, 1887. Holloway paid Sheriff Porter $200 to rule the death of James Sullivan an accident. Sullivan had complained about substandard railway ties being used on the new trestle bridge. 3 days later, he fell from that same bridge. No witnesses. Porter's investigation lasted less than 1 day. Sheriff Porter himself stood at the back of the church, his face ashen. People turned to stare at him, accusation in their eyes. "That's a lie," Porter said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You can't prove. We can prove everything." Leona took the journal from Caleb and flipped to another page. April 23, 1887. Contract for steel rails shows payment of $15 per ton. Actual delivery receipts show inferior steel purchased at $8 per ton. Difference of $7,000 pocketed by Holloway. Rails failed inspection 3 times before inspector was replaced with someone more cooperative. She turned page after page, reading Michael's careful documentation, each entry built on the last, creating an undeniable pattern of corruption and death. The crowd listened with growing horror, and Caleb watched their faces transform from skepticism to anger. "My husband gathered this evidence for 4 months, Leona continued. He risked everything because he knew people would die if those substandard materials were used. Bridges would collapse, buildings would fail, and Garth Holloway would get richer while families buried their dead." "This is slander!" a voice boomed from the back of the church. Everyone turned. Garth Holloway stood in the doorway, flanked by 6 armed men. He was a big man in his 50s, well-dressed, and radiating the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for his actions. His face was red with rage, but his voice remained controlled. "You come into a house of God and spread lies about a respected businessman?" Holloway's eyes swept the crowd. "I've donated thousands to this community. I've provided jobs, loans, opportunities. And this is how you repay me? By listening to the ravings of a sick widow and a drifter with delusions of heroism?" "These aren't lies," Caleb said calmly. "They're facts. Documented facts with names, dates, and evidence. Evidence that could easily be forged." Holloway took a step inside, his men following. "Michael Ward was a troubled man. Everyone knows that. He was caught embezzling from the railway company. That's why he died, trying to run away with stolen money." "That's not true!" Muir's voice rang out, high and furious. "My papa was good. He didn't steal nothing." Holloway's eyes fixed on the little girl with something cold and cruel. "Your papa was a thief and a liar, child. I'm sorry you had to learn that, but it's the truth." "You're the liar!" June shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You killed our papa!" The crowd stirred uneasily. Holloway sensed the shift and modulated his tone, going for sympathy. "I understand these children are grieving," he said smoothly. "Loss makes us irrational, makes us look for someone to blame. But the fact is, Michael Ward's death was investigated by Sheriff Porter and ruled an accident, unless you're suggesting our duly appointed lawman is corrupt." All eyes turned to Porter. The sheriff looked like a man drowning, his hand unconsciously moving toward his gun. I investigated thoroughly," Porter stammered. "There was no evidence of foul play." "Because you didn't look for any," Anna McRae said sharply from her seat. "Michael came to me the night before he died, Garth. Told me everything. Told me he was taking evidence to the U.S. Marshals, and the next day he was dead. You expect us to believe that's coincidence?" "I expect you to believe the official investigation," Holloway snapped. "Not gossip and conspiracy theories." Caleb stepped forward, putting himself between Holloway's men and the Ward family. "Then explain the receipts. Explain the contracts. Explain why materials paid for at premium prices were actually purchased at half cost." "Where'd that money go, Holloway?" "I don't have to explain anything to you, Drifter. You're trespassing on my town." "Your town?" Caleb's voice went cold. "Last I checked, towns belong to the people living in them, not to whoever had the most money and the least conscience." Holloway's face darkened. "You've got a smart mouth for someone who won't live to see morning." The threat hung in the air like poison. Several people in the crowd gasped. Reverend Whitmore stepped forward, his voice shaking but determined. "Mr. Holloway, threats of violence have no place in the Lord's house. If you have a legitimate response to these accusations, make it. Otherwise, please leave." "I'll leave when I'm ready, Reverend, and I'll take that forged journal with me when I go." Holloway gestured to his men. "Retrieve the evidence. Use whatever force is necessary." The 6 armed men started forward. Caleb's hand dropped to his Colt, but before he could draw, a surprising voice rang out. "Touch that journal, and I'll shoot you myself." Everyone turned to see Dr. Morrison standing, his hands trembling, but his old service revolver pointed squarely at Holloway's chest. "Edwin, Have you lost your mind? Holloway snarled. No, I've found it. Morrison's voice shook but held. I've let fear make me a coward for too long. Michael Ward came to me before he died, asking me to examine the body of James Sullivan. Wanted a second opinion on the cause of death. I refused. I was too afraid of you to do my duty as a doctor. And now Michael's dead too, and I have to live with that. You're a fool, Holloway spat. Maybe, but at least I'm an honest fool now. More people stood. The Dawson family, their faces set with determination. Workers from the railway site, Mrs. Chen. One by one, ordinary people finding extraordinary courage. Anna McRae stood and held up a piece of paper. I have Michael's will, she announced. He left it with me for safekeeping, along with instructions. If anything happened to him, I was to read it publicly. I think now is the time. She cleared her throat and began to read in a voice that carried to every corner of the church. I, Michael Ward, being of sound mind and body, write this in the event that my investigations into Garth Holloway's business practices result in my untimely death. If you're reading this, it means I was likely murdered to prevent the truth from coming to light. Do not let my death be in vain. The evidence I've gathered proves systematic fraud, corruption of public officials, and the deaths of at least 14 innocent men. Garth Holloway is responsible for all of it. He must face justice, not just for my sake, but for everyone who might die if his criminal enterprise continues unchecked. Anna's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. To my beloved wife Leona and my precious daughters Mira and June, I'm sorry I had to leave you. I'm sorry I chose duty over safety. But I couldn't live with myself if I let innocent people die just to keep my own family secure. You taught me that real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being terrified. Be brave, my loves. Be honest. Be kind. And know that I loved you more than life itself. Silence filled the church. Not a dry eye remained, even among Holloway's hired men. One of them, the youngest, barely 20, lowered his gun and stepped away from his employer. I didn't sign up to murder kids, he muttered. Get back in line, Holloway ordered. The young man shook his head. No, sir. I needed the money, but not that bad. Not bad enough to kill for a lie. Another man lowered his weapon, then another. Within moments, only 2 of Holloway's 6 men remained armed and ready. The balance of power had shifted. Holloway's face went purple with rage. You're all fools. That evidence is fabricated. I'll sue every one of you for slander. I'll destroy this entire town. No, you won't. Sheriff Porter's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone turned to see him standing with his gun drawn, but pointed at Holloway instead of Caleb. Because I've been carrying evidence of my own, 2 years' worth. Every bribe you paid me, every threat you made, every time you told me to look the other way when one of your men killed someone. Porter reached into his coat and pulled out a worn ledger, throwing it on the floor at Holloway's feet. I kept records too, the sheriff said, his voice breaking. I told myself it was insurance, a way to protect myself if you ever turned on me. But the truth is, I knew what we were doing was wrong. I knew, and I did it anyway because I was weak, because I was afraid. He looked at Leona, at Mira, and June, tears running down his weathered face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I could have saved your husband, could have protected you. Instead, I let a good man die and his family suffer. I'll live with that shame until I die. Leona stood and walked slowly to Porter. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. Michael's last journal entry was about you, Sheriff. He wrote that you were a good man trapped in a bad situation, that fear had made you weak but hadn't yet made you evil. He believed you could still choose to do the right thing. Porter's face crumpled. I failed him. Yes, Leona said. But you don't have to fail everyone else. You can still choose. Right now, in front of all these witnesses. You can still honor Michael's faith in you. The sheriff looked around the church at the faces watching him, judgment and hope mixed together in equal measure. Then he straightened his shoulders and turned to Holloway. Garth Holloway, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to Holloway drew a small pistol from his coat and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Sheriff Porter went down, blood spreading across his chest. Women screamed. Children cried. Chaos erupted as people dove for cover. Caleb's Colt cleared leather in a blur. His first shot hit Holloway's gun hand, sending the pistol flying. His second shot took out one of Holloway's remaining men. The third man raised his hands in surrender, wanting no part of the bloodshed. Holloway stumbled backward, clutching his mangled hand, his face twisted with pain and fury. "You're all dead," he shrieked. "Every one of you. I own this town. I own the territorial governor. I own judges and marshals, and you don't own me." The new voice came from the church entrance. Everyone turned to see a tall man in a long coat standing in the doorway, a U.S. Marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. Behind him stood 3 more marshals, all armed and grim-faced. Caleb felt relief wash over him like a wave. "Crawford." Marshal James Crawford nodded to his old friend, then fixed his hard eyes on Holloway. "Received an interesting telegram last night. Rode hard to get here. Looks like we arrived just in time." "This is a local matter," Holloway blustered, still clutching his bleeding hand. "You have no jurisdiction." "Federal fraud affecting interstate commerce gives me all the jurisdiction I need," Crawford interrupted. "And I've got testimony from 20 witnesses who just watched you shoot a lawman in a church. That's enough to hang you 3 times over." Dr. Morrison was already moving to Porter's side, examining the wound with practiced hands. "He's alive," he called out. "Bullet missed the heart. He'll make it if we get him to my office." 2 of the marshals moved forward and seized Holloway, forcing him to his knees despite his protests. Crawford walked to where Caleb stood with the Ward family. "You always did know how to make an entrance, Rowan," Crawford said with a slight smile. "Learned from the best." Caleb shook his old friend's hand. "Though I was hoping you'd arrive before the shooting started." "Would've, but we ran into some of Holloway's men on the road. They're currently tied up about 2 miles outside town, waiting for the territorial authorities." Crawford looked at Leona and the girls. "You must be the Ward family. I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a brave man." Leona's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure anyone would." Michael Ward's evidence was thorough and damning. Combined with the sheriff's ledger and the testimony we've gathered today, we have enough to dismantle Holloway's entire operation. Crawford's expression hardened as he looked at the cowering banker. "And to make sure he spends the rest of his life in federal prison." Holloway was dragged out of the church, still screaming threats and protests. The remaining hired men were rounded up and arrested. Sheriff Porter was carefully carried to Dr. Morrison's office, his ledger secured as evidence. As the marshals worked, the people of Elk Ridge slowly emerged from their shock. They looked at each other with new eyes, seeing neighbors who'd found courage, seeing a community that had finally stood together against tyranny. Reverend Whitmore approached Leona with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stood with your husband when he was alive. Should have—" "You stood with us tonight," Leona interrupted gently. "That's what matters now." Anna McRae gathered Mira and June in a fierce hug. "You girls were so brave. Your father would be so proud." People came forward one by one, offering apologies and support. The Dawson family invited Leona to stay with them until she was fully recovered. Mrs. Chen promised free laundry service for a year. Workers pledged to repair the Ward barn and fence without charge. A community that had been fractured by fear was slowly knitting itself back together, bound by shared guilt and shared redemption. Caleb stood apart, watching the scene unfold. Crawford joined him, observing the crowd with the practiced eye of a man who'd seen both the worst and best of human nature. "You did good here, Caleb," Crawford said quietly. "Saved a family. Exposed corruption. Reminded people what courage looks like. Just stumbled into it, really." "No, you didn't. You chose to stay when you could have run. That's not stumbling. That's character." Crawford paused. "I could use a man like you. The Marshal Service always has openings. Your badge is waiting if you want it back." Caleb looked at Mira and June, now surrounded by townspeople offering candy and comfort. Looked at Leona, exhausted but standing tall, finally free of the fear that had haunted her for months. "I appreciate the offer," he said slowly, "but I think my marshalling days are done. Got other responsibilities now." Crawford followed his gaze and smiled. "Those girls call you Daddy yet?" "Been calling me that since the day we met." "Then I'd say your responsibilities are pretty clear." Crawford clapped him on the shoulder. Take care of your family, Rowan. God knows they've been through enough. As Crawford returned to coordinating with his men, Caleb felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to find June gazing up at him with eyes that held too much trust and too much hope. Is it over? She asked. Are the bad men gone? Caleb knelt down so he was eye level with her. The bad men are gone. You're safe now. Your mama's safe. Your sister's safe. Because of you, June said solemnly. Because you came back. Because you kept your promise. Mira joined them, her young face serious. Are you going away now? Now that the danger's over? The question hung between them, the same question Caleb had been asking himself since the marshals arrived. He had no ties to this place, no obligations beyond what he'd chosen to take on. He could leave tomorrow, drift to the next town, return to the rootless existence he'd maintained for 3 years. But as he looked at these two girls, at their mother standing exhausted but triumphant across the church, Caleb realized something fundamental had changed. He'd found what he'd been running from: connection, responsibility, family, and this time he didn't want to run. No, he said firmly, I'm not going anywhere. I made a promise to be your daddy, and I keep my promises. That means I stay. Both girls threw themselves at him, wrapping their small arms around his neck in a grip that felt like salvation. Over their heads, Caleb's eyes met Leona's across the crowded church. She mouthed 2 words. Thank you. He nodded, understanding passing between them that needed no elaboration. They'd survived. Together. And somehow, in the midst of violence and grief, they'd found something worth holding on to. Hope. The word Michael Ward had named their horse. The word that had sustained his family through the darkest times. The word that Caleb Rowan had lost 3 years ago and finally, miraculously, found again. As the church slowly emptied and the people of Elkridge dispersed into the night, forever changed by what they'd witnessed, Caleb helped Leona and the girls into their wagon for the journey home. The ride back to the cabin was quiet, everyone too exhausted for words. But it was a peaceful quiet now, free of the terror that had poisoned every moment for the past 4 months. The danger had passed. The truth had won. And in the morning, they could begin the work of rebuilding not just a barn and a fence, but a life together. Under the vast Montana sky, stars emerged one by one, brilliant and cold and eternal. Caleb guided the wagon through the darkness, acutely aware of the precious cargo he carried. 3 lives that had become intertwined with his own in ways he was only beginning to understand. Behind them, Elkridge settled into the kind of sleep that comes after great upheaval. Tomorrow would bring questions and consequences, investigations and trials. But tonight, justice had been served and innocence preserved. And a broken man who'd thought he could never love again discovered that the human heart, like the Montana landscape itself, was capable of enduring the harshest winters and still finding the strength to bloom again when spring finally came. The wagon creaked to a stop in front of the cabin just as the moon reached its zenith, bathing the scarred property in silver light. The burned skeleton of the barn stood like a monument to all they'd survived, but somehow it looked less menacing now, more like a testament to their endurance. Caleb helped Leona down first, her legs shaky from exhaustion and the lingering effects of her illness. She leaned against him for a moment longer than necessary, and he didn't pull away. We did it, she whispered, as if saying it too loud might break the spell. Michael's finally at peace. He is, Caleb agreed, lifting June down while Mira scrambled over the wagon side on her own. And you can be too. It's over, Leona. Really over. Inside the cabin, the fire had died to embers. Caleb built it back up while Leona tucked the girls into their cot, both of them asleep almost before their heads touched the pillow. The terror that had kept them vigilant for so long had finally released its grip, and their small bodies surrendered to the exhaustion they'd been fighting. Leona sat on the edge of her bed, watching her daughters with an expression that mixed relief and lingering fear, as if she couldn't quite believe they were safe. You should rest too, Caleb said, pulling a chair close to the fire. I'll keep watch. There's nothing to watch for anymore. But even as she said it, her eyes darted to the window, old habits dying hard. Then I'll keep you company while you rest. Leona smiled faintly. You're a stubborn man, Caleb Rowan. So I've been told. She lay back on her bed, but her eyes remained open, fixed on the ceiling. What happens now? Tomorrow, I mean, and all the days after that. Tomorrow the town starts rebuilding, Caleb said. Not just buildings, trust, community, the things Holloway destroyed. Marshal Crawford will handle the legal proceedings. Holloway will stand trial, probably hang. The railway company will send investigators to assess the damage and replace everything he sabotaged. And us? What happens to us? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Caleb heard what she was really asking, whether he meant what he'd said in the church, whether he'd stay or drift away once the excitement faded, whether the family they'd forged in crisis could survive peace. That's up to you, he said carefully. I meant what I told the girls. I'm staying if you'll have me. But Leona, you need to understand. I'm not Michael. I can't replace him, and I won't try. I don't want you to replace him. Leona sat up, meeting his eyes directly. Michael was my husband, the father of my children, and I'll love his memory until I die. But he's gone. And you're here. You're real and alive, and you've given us back our future. I'm also broken, Caleb said bluntly. I've got ghosts that wake me up at night. I've done things in my past that would turn your stomach. I'm not the hero you think I am. I don't need a hero. I need a partner. Someone who understands that life is hard and unfair, but worth fighting for anyway. She stood and crossed to him, her bare feet silent on the rough floor. You think I don't have ghosts too? You think I don't wake up crying because I can't remember the exact sound of Michael's laugh anymore? We're both broken, Caleb, but maybe broken people can help each other heal. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his scarred cheek. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make promises you can't keep. I'm just asking, stay. Help me raise these girls. Help me rebuild this ranch, and let me help you remember what it feels like to have a home. Caleb's throat tightened. For 3 years he'd been running from exactly this: connection, vulnerability, the terrifying possibility of caring about someone enough to be destroyed by their loss. But looking at Leona now, seeing the strength in her despite everything she'd endured, he realized that running had only made him weaker. I'll stay, he said hoarsely. As long as you'll have me, I'll stay. Leona leaned down and kissed his forehead, a gesture of tenderness that nearly undid him. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go, together. She returned to her bed, and this time when she closed her eyes, sleep came quickly. Caleb sat watching the fire, listening to the peaceful breathing of 3 people who'd somehow become his reason for existing. Outside, the Montana night settled into silence, broken only by the whisper of wind and the occasional crack of freezing branches. For the first time in 3 years, Caleb Rowan allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. Morning arrived with pale sunshine struggling through clouds, the kind of weak winter light that promised nothing but kept showing up anyway. Caleb woke to find he'd dozed in his chair, his neck stiff, but his soul lighter than he could remember. Mira was already up, trying to cook breakfast with June's earnest but chaotic help. Leona remained asleep, her face peaceful in the morning light, the fever flush finally gone from her cheeks. "Daddy Caleb?" Mira whispered, not wanting to wake her mother. "Is it really over? The bad men won't come back?" Caleb pulled her into a hug, this serious little girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast. "It's really over. Mr. Holloway is in jail. His men are scattered or arrested. You're safe now, sweetheart." "Forever?" June asked, peering up at him with those wide, trusting eyes. "Forever," Caleb promised, hoping it was a promise he could keep. A knock at the door made everyone freeze, old fears dying hard. But when Caleb opened it, he found Anna McRae standing on the porch with a basket of food and a smile that lit up her weathered face. "Brought breakfast," she announced, pushing past him into the cabin. "And lunch. And probably dinner, too, knowing how much I packed. Figured you folks could use some proper meals after everything." Behind her came the Dawson family, carrying lumber. Then Mrs. Chen with fresh linens. Then workers from the railway site with tools and determination. Within an hour, the small yard was filled with townspeople, all bringing gifts of food, supplies, labor, and apologies. "We should have stood with Michael," old Mr. Dawson said, his voice gruff with shame. "Should have protected your family when Holloway came after you. We were cowards, Mrs. Ward. We're here to make amends if you'll let us. Leona stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the outpouring. You're here now, she said simply. That's what matters. The day transformed into a barn-raising unlike any Caleb had ever seen. Men swarmed over the burned structure, tearing down what was unsalvageable and building fresh framework. Women organized food and supplies, while children played in the snow, their laughter a sound the property hadn't heard in months. Even Reverend Whitmore appeared, hammer in hand and determination on his face. A church that won't stand with the oppressed has forgotten its purpose, he declared. Today, we remember. By noon, the barn's skeleton was rising again. By evening, the roof was half finished and the fence completely repaired. People worked with fierce dedication, as if the physical labor could somehow atone for months of moral cowardice. Caleb worked alongside them, feeling the acceptance settle over him like a warm coat. These people were claiming him as one of their own, and somewhere in the rhythm of hammering nails and sawing boards, he realized he was letting them. As sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Marshal Crawford rode up with Sheriff Porter seated behind him in the saddle, the lawman's chest wrapped in bandages but his eyes clear. Heard there was building going on, Crawford called out. Thought Dale here might want to contribute, seeing as he's got some making up to do. Porter slid carefully from the horse, wincing at the movement. He approached Leona slowly, hat in his hands, his face carved with regret. Mrs. Ward, I don't expect forgiveness, he began. What I didn't do, cost your husband his life and nearly destroyed your family. I'll carry that shame to my grave. Leona studied him for a long moment. The yard had gone quiet, everyone watching this confrontation. Finally, she spoke. Sheriff Porter, my husband wrote that you were a good man trapped by fear. He believed people could change, could choose courage even after choosing cowardice. I'm going to honor Michael's faith in you by giving you the chance to prove him right. Porter's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve... None of us deserve grace, Leona interrupted gently. We receive it anyway. That's what makes it grace. The sheriff nodded, unable to speak. Then he picked up a hammer and joined the workers, laboring despite his injury until the last nail was driven and the barn stood complete. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, someone produced a fiddle. Music filled the cold air, and children danced while adults stood around warming their hands on cups of coffee and cider. The celebration was spontaneous and joyful, a community rediscovering itself after months of fear. Caleb found himself standing with Crawford, watching the scene unfold. You've got a good thing here, the marshal observed. A family, a community, a purpose. You sure you don't want a pin on a badge again? I'm sure. My purpose is right there. Caleb nodded toward where Leona sat with Mira and June, all three of them laughing at something Anna McRae had said. Been chasing ghosts for 3 years. Time I started building something instead. Building's harder than chasing, Crawford warned. Takes more courage to stay than to run. I know, but I'm tired of running. Crawford smiled. Then I'm happy for you, old friend. You've earned this peace. As the marshal prepared to leave, he handed Caleb a sealed envelope. Official commendation from the territorial governor. Your testimony about Holloway's crimes helped crack open a corruption ring that stretches all the way to the Capitol. There'll be more arrests coming, more trials. But your part is done. After Crawford rode away, Caleb stood holding the envelope, feeling the weight of official recognition. It meant something, he supposed. Vindication, closure, proof that Michael Ward hadn't died in vain. But it felt less important than the sound of June's laughter or the way Leona smiled when she caught him watching her. The celebration wound down as families headed home, promising to return the next day to finish the remaining work. Soon only Caleb and the Ward family remained, standing in the yard looking at the new barn that stood where destruction had been just days before. It's beautiful, Leona whispered. It's a barn, Caleb said, but he was smiling. It's more than that. It's proof that things can be rebuilt, that destruction doesn't have to be permanent. Mira tugged on Caleb's hand. Daddy Caleb, can we name the barn? Barns don't usually have names, sweetheart. Hope had a name, June pointed out, referring to their mare. And she's important. The barn's important too. It should have a name. Caleb looked at Leona, who shrugged with amusement. They make a compelling argument. All right, he said. What should we name it? The girls huddled together, whispering seriously. Finally, Mira announced, New Beginnings. We're calling it the New Beginnings Barn. Something about the name hit Caleb square in the chest. New Beginnings. That's exactly what this was. For all of them. A chance to start over, to build something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. New beginnings it is, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That night, after the girls were asleep and Leona had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Caleb sat by the fire with Michael Ward's journal open in his lap. He'd read through it completely now, understanding the careful, brave man who'd documented evil at the cost of his own life. On the last page, Michael had written a final entry dated the day before he died. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm sitting in my rocking chair as an old man, laughing about how paranoid I was. But if I'm not, if Holloway got to me the way he's gotten to so many others, then please know this. I died trying to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I died believing that truth matters more than power, that courage matters more than comfort, that some things are worth dying for. Take care of my girls. Tell them their father loved them more than anything in this world. Tell them to be brave, be honest, be kind. And tell Leona, tell her she was the best thing that ever happened to me. Whatever happens, don't let fear win. Don't let evil triumph just because good people were too afraid to fight. Be brave. Be the light in the darkness. That's all any of us can do. Caleb closed the journal carefully, understanding why Leona had loved this man, why his daughters spoke of him with such pride. Michael Ward had been everything Caleb wished he could be, brave without being reckless, strong without being cruel, willing to sacrifice without seeking glory. I'll take care of them, Caleb whispered to the darkness, as if Michael's spirit might still be listening. I'll be the man they need, I promise. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that felt almost normal. Leona's health improved daily under Dr. Morrison's continued care. The new barn was finished and filled with hay donated by neighboring farms. Caleb found work as a deputy under Sheriff Porter, who was slowly earning back the town's trust through honest labor and genuine contrition. January gave way to February, the worst of winter settling in with brutal cold and heavy snows. But the Ward cabin was warm and full of life. Caleb taught the girls to read from Michael's collection of books. Leona taught him to cook meals that didn't come from a can or a campfire. They worked together to keep the property running, falling into an easy partnership that felt more right with each passing day. On a crisp morning in early March, Caleb was repairing fence line when he heard hoofbeats. He turned to see a small carriage approaching, official-looking and out of place on the rural road. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun before he recognized the territorial seal on the carriage door. The man who emerged was in his 60s, well-dressed, and carrying himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He extended his hand to Caleb. Mr. Rowan, I'm Judge Harrison Blackwell, Territorial Circuit Court. I've been overseeing the prosecution of Garth Holloway and his associates. Wondered if I might have a word with you and Mrs. Ward. Inside the cabin, with coffee served and pleasantries exchanged, Judge Blackwell laid out his purpose. Holloway's trial concluded yesterday, he said, found guilty on all counts, fraud, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and the murder of Sheriff Porter during his arrest. He'll hang within the month. Leona's face remained impassive, but Caleb saw her hands tremble slightly. Good, she said quietly. And the others? 23 arrests total. Railway officials, territorial administrators, hired guns. Holloway's entire network has collapsed. The evidence your husband gathered, combined with Sheriff Porter's testimony, brought down one of the largest corruption rings in Montana Territory's history. The judge pulled papers from his briefcase. Which brings me to why I'm here. The territorial government is deeply embarrassed by this scandal. As partial restitution, they're offering the Ward family a settlement, $10,000 plus full ownership of your property with all debts forgiven. Additionally, the railway company is offering compensation for Michael Ward's death and for the structural failures caused by Holloway's fraud. Leona stared at him in shock. $10,000? Plus another $5,000 from the railway company. It's not charity, Mrs. Ward. It's what you're owed for your husband's service to justice and for the suffering your family endured. $15,000. It was more money than Leona had seen in her lifetime. Enough to rebuild the ranch completely, to secure her daughter's futures, to live without the constant fear of poverty. There's one more matter, Judge Blackwell continued. Sheriff Porter is retiring from law enforcement, doctor's orders after his injury. The position is vacant and the territorial governor asked me to offer it to you, Mr. Rowan. Full salary, official badge, authority to hire your own deputies. Elkridge needs a lawman it can trust. Caleb felt everyone's eyes on him. This was the life he'd left behind, wearing a badge, enforcing law, carrying the weight of a community's safety. It was familiar territory, comfortable in its way. But it was also the life that had cost him his first family. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take a week. The position will wait. Judge Blackwell stood to leave. You're a good man, Mr. Rowan. This town is lucky to have you. After the judge departed, Leona and Caleb sat in silence, both processing what had just happened. $15,000, Leona finally said. We could buy livestock, expand the ranch, build a real house. The girls could go to school, maybe even college someday. You've earned it. Michael earned it. We earned it, she corrected. You were the one who brought Holloway to justice. You saved us, Caleb. This money belongs to all of us. The casual way she said, all of us, made something shift in Caleb's chest. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped being a stranger helping a desperate family. He'd become part of that family. What do you think about the sheriff position? He asked. Leona considered carefully. I think you'd be good at it. You understand justice, understand when to fight, and when to show mercy. But I also think it's dangerous, and we've had enough danger to last a lifetime. That's what I'm thinking, too. But Leona continued, I also think you need purpose. You're not the kind of man who can just tend a ranch and call it a life. You need to feel like you're making a difference. She was right, and they both knew it. Caleb's been a lawman most of his adult life. It wasn't just a job. It was who he was. What if I took the position, but did it differently? He said slowly. What if I built a department based on Porter's mistakes? Transparency, accountability, serving the community instead of controlling it. I could hire young deputies, train them right from the start, make Elkridge a model for how law enforcement should work. Leona smiled. Now that sounds like something worth doing. You sure? It means danger, late nights, worry every time I walk out that door. Caleb, I married a man who fought corruption knowing it might kill him. I can handle worry if it means you're doing work that matters. She reached across the table and took his hand. Besides, you'd be sheriff of Elkridge, not a U.S. Marshal chasing outlaws across 3 territories. You'd come home most nights. That's more than many women get. The word married hung between them, neither quite ready to address it directly but both hearing its implications. That night, after the girls were asleep, Caleb and Leona sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching stars emerge. Can I ask you something? Leona said quietly. Anything. When you look at me, do you see Sarah? The question caught Caleb off guard. He'd been thinking about his dead wife more lately, comparing his feelings for Leona to what he'd felt for Sarah, trying to understand if he was betraying one by caring for the other. No, he said honestly. You're nothing like Sarah. She was gentle, quiet, preferred books to people. You're fierce, brave, willing to pick up a rifle and face down armed men to protect your children. Sarah would have hidden. You charged straight into the fight. Is that good or bad? It's different. It's you. He turned to look at her. I loved Sarah with everything I had. When she died, I thought that was it. I'd had my one chance at love and lost it. But what I'm feeling now, it's not the same as what I felt for her, but it's just as real. Maybe more real because I know how fragile it is, how quickly it can be taken away. Leona was quiet for a long moment. I feel the same way. I loved Michael desperately, but he's been gone 4 months, and I'm still here, still living, still feeling things I thought died with him. Sometimes I feel guilty for moving on so fast. 4 months isn't fast, and feeling alive isn't betrayal, it's survival. Is that what this is? Survival? Maybe it started that way, but it's become more than that, at least for me. Leona's hand found his in the darkness. For me too. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching their breath form clouds in the frigid air. Neither of them spoke about marriage or forever or any of the big questions that loomed. They didn't need to. Some things developed in their own time, growing slowly like saplings that would eventually become mighty trees. When Caleb accepted the sheriff position a week later, the town celebrated with genuine joy. Marshal Crawford came for the swearing in, along with territorial officials and half of Elkridge's population. Caleb took his oath with Leona standing beside him, and Mira and June pressed against his legs, their small hands gripping his trousers like anchors. Do you solemnly swear to uphold the laws of Montana Territory and the United States of America, to serve and protect the citizens of Elkridge with honor and integrity, so help you God? I do, Caleb said, and felt the weight of the badge settle on his chest like coming home. His first act as sheriff was to hire 2 deputies, young men from the railway crew who'd stood with them in the church. His second act was to establish open office hours where any citizen could bring complaints without fear of retribution. His third act was to visit Michael Ward's grave and make a quiet promise to continue the work the fallen man had started. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch. As the land thawed, so did the hearts of people who'd lived under Holloway's shadow for so long. Businesses reopened. Families returned who'd fled the corruption. Elkridge began to feel like a real town again, instead of a prison. The Ward Ranch thrived with the settlement money carefully invested. They bought a milk cow and chickens, expanded the garden, hired a carpenter to add a second room to the cabin. Caleb moved his few possessions into that new room, maintaining propriety while being close enough to protect what had become his family in all but legal name. On a warm evening in late May, nearly 6 months after he'd first stumbled across 2 desperate girls by a fence line, Caleb found himself helping Leona plant flowers around the new barn. The girls were playing nearby, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "Daddy Caleb," June called, "come see the bird's nest we found." He went, as he always did when his daughters called, because that's what they were now, his daughters in every way that mattered. And Leona was, well, they still hadn't quite defined what Leona was, but the undefined nature of their relationship felt right somehow, honest in its gradual development. That night, tucking the girls into their beds, Mira asked the question that had clearly been brewing for weeks. "Daddy Caleb, are you going to marry Mama?" Caleb glanced at Leona, who'd frozen in the doorway. They'd both been carefully avoiding this topic, letting their relationship develop naturally without the pressure of expectations. "Do you want me to?" he asked carefully. "Yes," both girls said in unison. "Why?" Mira thought seriously about her answer. "Because you love her, and she loves you. And we're already a family, but it would be nice if it was official." "Official," Caleb repeated, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's a good word. Plus," June added with childish pragmatism, "then you'd live with us all the time instead of just most of the time." From the doorway, Leona cleared her throat. "Girls, marriage is complicated. Daddy Caleb and I have only known each other 6 months. These things take time." "Mama," Mira said with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can muster, "Papa died in a second. Bad things happen fast. Why can't good things happen fast too?" The logic was irrefutable. Leona's eyes met Caleb's across the small room, a question in them that matched the one in his heart. Why couldn't good things happen fast? "Tell you what," Caleb said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "Let me talk to your mama alone for a bit. Then we'll see about making things official." The girls squealed with excitement as Leona ushered them under their covers. When they were finally settled, she and Caleb stepped outside into the spring night. "You don't have to do this," Leona said immediately. "Just because the girls asked." "I'm not doing it because the girls asked." Caleb took her hands, holding them gently. "I'm doing it because I wake up every morning grateful you're alive. Because I go to work thinking about coming home to you. Because when I imagine my future, you're in every part of it. Caleb, I know it's fast. I know we're both still carrying ghosts. I know there's 1,000 reasons to wait and be sensible and take our time." He drew a breath. "But Mira's right. Bad things happen fast. I learned that when I lost Sarah and Tommy. So why can't good things happen just as fast? Why can't we grab happiness while we have the chance? Leona's eyes filled with tears. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking if you'd be willing to take a chance on a broken-down former marshal with more scars than sense. I'm asking if you'd let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you and those girls. I'm asking... She kissed him, cutting off his words with lips that tasted like hope and spring rain and promises worth keeping. When she pulled back, she was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. To you, to us, to making this family official. From inside the cabin came twin squeals of joy. Apparently the girls had been listening at the window. Caleb and Leona laughed, wrapped in each other's arms under a sky full of stars. They married in June, in the same church where they'd exposed Holloway's crimes. Reverend Whitmore performed the ceremony with tears in his eyes, blessing a union born from tragedy but sustained by courage. The entire town attended, bearing witness to the truth that love could bloom even in the harshest soil. Mira and June served as flower girls, scattering petals with solemn importance. Marshall Crawford stood as best man, having ridden 200 miles just to see his old friend find happiness again. Anna McRae cried through the whole ceremony, declaring it the most beautiful thing she'd seen in 40 years. When Caleb kissed his bride, he felt the ghosts of his past finally release their grip. Sarah and Tommy would always be part of him, but they were memory now, not chains. He could honor them by living fully instead of merely surviving. The reception lasted until dawn, with fiddle music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the crowd. As the sun rose over the Montana hills, painting the world in shades of gold and promise, Caleb stood with his new family, watching the new day begin. "What are you thinking?" Leona asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "That 6 months ago I was a man with nothing left to lose. Now I have everything to live for." "Scary, isn't it?" "Terrifying," he admitted, "but worth it." Mira tugged on his hand. "Daddy, now that you're really our daddy forever, can we get a dog?" Everyone laughed, and Caleb found himself agreeing before he'd thought it through. Why not a dog? Why not fill this new life with as much joy as it could hold? Summer unfolded in a cascade of warm days and gentle nights. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Caleb's work as sheriff brought stability to Elkridge, his fair enforcement and genuine care for the community slowly healing the wounds Holloway had inflicted. Leona transformed their expanded cabin into a true home, full of laughter and love and the 1,000 small moments that make up a life. In August, on a lazy afternoon with storm clouds gathering on the horizon, Leona pulled Caleb aside with an expression that was equal parts nervous and excited. "I have something to tell you," she said. From her tone, Caleb knew before she spoke. His eyes dropped to where her hand rested protectively over her stomach. "How long?" he asked softly. 2 months, maybe. Dr. Morrison confirmed it yesterday. She searched his face anxiously. "Are you happy? I know we didn't plan—" Caleb silenced her with a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't: joy, wonder, gratitude, and a fierce determination to protect this new life they'd created together. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said against her hair. "Terrified, grateful, amazed, but mostly just honored that I get to do this with you." They told the girls that evening over dinner, watching their faces transform from confusion to understanding to absolute delight. "A baby?" June breathed, her eyes huge. "A real baby?" "Real as can be," Leona confirmed, "due in February. That means we're going to be big sisters," Mira exclaimed, then immediately began planning everything from names to which cot the baby would use to how she'd teach it to read. That night, after the girls had finally exhausted themselves with excitement and fallen asleep, Caleb and Leona lay in their bed listening to the rain that had finally arrived, drumming steadily on the new roof. "You know what this means?" Leona said quietly. "What?" "We're not just rebuilding what was destroyed. We're creating something completely new. This baby. It's not replacing what we lost. It's proof that we can move forward without forgetting where we came from." Caleb placed his hand over hers on her still flat stomach. "Michael would approve, I think." "He would," Leona agreed. "He always said life was for the living, that the best way to honor the dead was to embrace life fully. That's what we're doing." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Caleb built a cradle from Montana pine, his hands remembering skills he'd thought forgotten. Leona sewed blankets and gowns with help from the girls, who threw themselves into their future roles as big sisters with endearing seriousness. The town watched the Ward Rowan family's expansion with genuine warmth, seeing in their happiness a reflection of their own community's healing. Baby gifts appeared on the sheriff's office doorstep. Anna McRae organized a group of women to help when the baby arrived. Even hard men who worked the railway line found themselves whittling toys and offering gruff congratulations. Winter returned, but this time it held no terror. The barn stood strong against the wind. The cabin was warm and well-stocked, and on a snowy evening in early February, as Mira read aloud to June by the fire and Caleb banked the stove, Leona quietly announced that it was time. The next hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Dr. Morrison arrived with his wife, both of them calm and efficient. Caleb paced outside despite the cold, unable to stay still, remembering another birth 7 years ago that had ended in joy. Mira and June waited with Anna McRae, their faces tight with worry, until the moment they heard the baby's first cry pierce the night. Caleb burst through the door to find Leona exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the blanket she'd sewn. "Come meet your son," she said softly. His son. The words hit Caleb with the force of revelation. He crossed the room on shaking legs and looked down at the red, wrinkled face of the baby squalling in Leona's arms. "He's perfect," Caleb whispered. "He's loud," Leona laughed, tears streaming down her face, "and hungry and already demanding attention, but yes, he's perfect." Mira and June crowded in, staring at their new brother with wonder. "Can we hold him?" Mira asked. Soon they were all on the bed together, the girls carefully cradling the baby while Caleb supported their arms, and Leona watched with eyes full of contentment. Dr. Morrison and his wife slipped out quietly, leaving the family to their private miracle. "What should we name him?" June asked. They discussed names for months, but never settled on one that felt right. Now, looking at this new life they'd created together, Caleb knew exactly what to call him. "Hope," he said. "We'll name him Hope." Leona's eyes widened, understanding the significance. "Like the mare. Like the thing that kept us all alive when everything else was trying to kill us. Hope Michael Rowan, if that's all right with you." "It's perfect," Leona whispered, crying openly now. "Michael would be so proud." As dawn broke over the Montana landscape, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, the Rowan family gathered around their newest member. 2 little girls who'd lost their father but gained another. A woman who'd survived grief and illness and violence to find love again. A man who'd thought his heart too broken to ever heal. And a baby born into safety and joy, proof that endings could become beginnings, that loss could transform into hope. Caleb stood at the window, holding his son with practiced ease, watching the sun rise on a new day. Behind him, Leona dozed with Mira and June curled against her sides. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and baby powder and coffee, ordinary scents that suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. 6 months ago, he'd been a drifter with nothing but a horse and a gun and 3 years of running from his pain. Now he was a husband, a father to 3 children, a sheriff sworn to protect a community he'd grown to love. Now he had a home, a purpose, a future worth fighting for. On Christmas morning the previous year, 2 desperate girls had grabbed his boot and begged him to be their daddy. He'd thought it was just for a day, just long enough to get them through their darkest moment. But as he looked at his sleeping family, at the life they'd built together from ashes and determination, Caleb Rowan understood that some promises weren't meant to be temporary. He'd told those girls he'd be their daddy. He'd promised to protect them, to give them hope, to stay when staying was hard. And he had. Through violence and corruption and all the darkness Montana winter could throw at them, he'd kept that promise. Now, holding his infant son while his daughter slept and his wife rested, he made a new promise. Not to the world, not to the law, not to anyone but the family sleeping peacefully around him. He promised to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given, to honor both the family he'd lost and the family he'd found, to protect what was precious, to fight for what was right, and to never take a single moment for granted. Because Caleb Rowan had learned the hardest lesson life could teach, that love was fragile and fleeting and could be stolen in an instant. But he'd also learned something even more important, that love was worth the risk, that joy could bloom in the coldest winter, that broken people could heal each other, that home wasn't a place but a collection of hearts beating together. And that when two desperate little girls grabbed your boot and called you daddy, sometimes the best thing you could do was stop running and start building the life you thought you'd lost forever. Outside, the Montana sun climbed higher, chasing away the last shadows of night. Inside the warm cabin, a family slept peacefully, safe in the knowledge that they were loved, protected, and home forever.